Hello and welcome to the 40th episode of the Open One podcast, and I am super excited to bring this episode to you guys because we've got a special show lined up for you today. Like to do something kind of cool every 10 episodes, so here we are, episode 40. Wow, what a journey it's been. If you haven't already, go to my website traviscook.uk and you can check out 39 episodes of the best spiritual, political, empowering content. There's loads of stuff on there. You'll go through that entire catalogue of shows and you won't be the same person that entered into the arena of the Open One podcast. You will come out a completely different person. Your entire life will be changed. You'll come out of new revelations and new perspectives and new insights, new ways of looking at the world that will serve you in your day-to-day life in a very, very positive, empowering way. Obviously, most of those are with other people, with some amazing, amazing guests, some quite famous. Don't know how I managed to land Robert Malone for the first ever show, but I did. David Icke too. But there's also a few shows where it's just me speaking, and I think I'm going to do more of that because I've got so much to share with you guys. There's so much to talk about, especially when it comes to spirituality. That's going to be the main focus point of this one. And it's going to be quite a long one because this is actually going to be a recording of the presentation that I delivered in Buxton recently. I had a talk there. It went really, really well. Big ups to the Buxton crew. It's a really cool thing they've got going on there, the Buxton Freedom Hub. But I thought I'd record it as a standalone episode for the podcast just to give anybody who was actually there another opportunity to revisit the show because there's a lot of stuff in this presentation. But then also, for anybody who couldn't make it, you're going to now have the show on demand. And the title of the presentation was Spirituality to Save Humanity. I do believe the long-term solution to our problems is a evolved population, a spiritually evolved population. That's how I believe we win long-term, how we create the better world. We have a society full of people that are super evolved. And that's going to lead to the solving long-term of the problems that we face on a political level. Because no doubt we're in some trouble. There's things happening. We've got to sort things out. But the political problems that bubble to the surface, I believe, are just symptoms of a greater spiritual problem. But much like you get a cut and you have to treat it with a bandage or put a plaster on it, you've got to deal with these political problems as they arise. But to solve that long term, we need a spiritually evolved population. So that's what the main focus point of the talk was. You're really, really going to enjoy it. It's a bit of a long one. It's 2 hours roughly. So sit back, relax, grab some snacks, get something to cuddle, whether that's a human or a pet or a nice hot drink. You're not going to be the same person by the end of it. There's so much in here. You could watch this a few times over, I'm sure. And there'll be stuff you've never heard before, new revelations, new perspectives, new ways of looking at the world that are going to change who you are as a person for good. Because I believe spirituality is how we solve this day to day, is how we solve our problems long term, because I actually live this, because spirituality has saved me from the darkest parts, the most challenging parts of my life and my journey. It was spirituality that got me back to baseline normality, if you like, from the depths back up to zero. And then it was spirituality that took my life from 0 to 100, and not just with peak experiences, which can be really amazing. You know, we all want some incredible mind-blowing experiences, but from a consistent day-to-day baseline vibe, spirituality has helped me so much. Spirituality has given me an incredible sense of meaning and purpose and dedication, because I found my mission, and my mission is to help you guys, the awakened, because I've almost fucking given up trying to wake people up, you know? I'm so past that. I'm way past that. But what I've realized is my mission, my calling, is to help people who are already awake on their awakening journey. And I've chosen spirituality to be my main focus point. So in this talk, I'm going to just, really, it's 2 hours, but I'm still only going to be scratching the surface of what spirituality is all about. And so this is why I've created my book. Very, very happy and excited to announce My third book is on the way. The first draft was written this year in 3 months over one cloudy winter in Wales. It's called Spirituality Without the Bullshit. 50,000 words, 3 months. It took 3 months to write, but it took 12 years to live through the journey, to be able to build and create the knowledge and wisdom and perspectives and stories that have all gone into this book. So 3 months to write, but 12 years to build. That is Spirituality Without the Bullshit. And I go through basically the spirituality that I live every single day. The problems with religion, also credit where credit's due. Some parts of religion are good and have served a very important purpose. Then the same thing with the New Age. I think the New Age is very superficial, and I've seen what happens to people when they get lost in the traps of the New Age. But then there are some good things too. And I go through all of that, and I go deep into the spiritual journey itself, covering all of the important things that I believe everybody needs to be aware of and needs to implement in their lives, because the worst thing is somebody who doesn't have any kind of spirituality at all. And you're going to see that. I'm going to go through all of that in my talk. But if you haven't already, go to my website, traviscook.uk. You can find all of the previous episodes, 39 episodes for you to get your teeth into. But then also you can find some of my writings, and you can find the books that I've released already. But when you're on the website, what you want to do is you want to sign up to the mailing list. And you can find that at the footer of every single page, or there's a pop-up, or it's also on the home page. It's everywhere. Just sign up, because signing up to the mailing list is defeating censorship, because mailing lists, believe it or not, even in 2024, are still the best way to reach people because they're censorship free. You sign up to the mailing list, you're going to get the email. There's no one stopping that email getting to you. It's just whether you see it or you open it or whatever, but you will get the email, as opposed to Instagram, where the algorithm is, very biased and will show whatever they want to show, right? But still, Instagram is a pretty good platform. So if you're on there, give me a follow. Instagram and Telegram are where I am most prolific. You can catch me on there at Travis Cook UK. Obviously, the links are also on the website. Give us a follow. And if you are somebody who's kind of active, if you're an advanced being that's got perspectives that you want to share and you want to speak to an advanced, enlightened, intelligent community, I'd love to see you in the Telegram chat. Be great to have you in there. Always like to connect with more like-minded, wise, spiritual people that have insights and knowledge to share. I'd love to see you on the Telegram chat. So without further ado, let's get stuck in. I hope you're comfy. I hope you got something to cuddle, something to eat, something to drink. And let's get into the 40th episode of the Open One podcast, Spirituality to Save Humanity. Right, let's get into this bad boy of a presentation. So, Spirituality to Save Humanity. And my name, of course, is Travis Cook. So, as I was giving this talk to a bunch of people who probably didn't know who I was, I included a bit about who I am and how I woke up. So, I'm going to keep it pretty much true to how the presentation was on the day. So, we're going to go through a bit about who I am and how I got to where I am now. So, when I was 4 years old, my parents split up. I remember my dad sitting me down and he's like, Trav, you're the man of the house now. It's like, okay. So that was quite a defining moment, I think, in my childhood. Then when I was 14 years old, I discovered women, weed, and weekends. And you could say everything went downhill from there. But to be honest, I had a lot of fun. I don't regret the partying I did. I don't regret all of the great sex that I had in that period, and I don't regret hanging out with my friends and just shooting the shit in nature, smoking weed. It was some of the best times of my life, and we formed such a tight-knit group. It was awesome, and I think that gave me the social skills that I needed to be able to transfer the spiritual knowledge and everything else that I come to later on. And then when I'm 18 years old, I go into my first and last matrix job. So I went into college for 2 years, studied mechanical engineering. It was okay. I was just following the motions though. I didn't really give it much thought. I was just like, I should probably do this. It sounds like a good career and I'll probably get good money and whatever. So I just went for it. And I call it a matrix job because when I say matrix job, I basically mean a job you're doing that you hate, but just to survive out of fear. Because the actual job itself, was a very important job. It was working for a company called Trinity House, and they manage all of the lighthouses and the buoys all around the country. And naval navigation wouldn't be able to happen without this very important company. But what I saw at my time in Trinity House is what happens to people when they're in this job and it's not their passion, it's not what lights them up on the inside, it's not their path of a heart. They've just gone into this career because they thought they should, and they've been kept in check by fear ever since. And I saw what happens when people are in that position for 10, 20, 30 years and what it can do to someone, these empty shells of a person. But also, there were some people who just absolutely fucking loved it. They were like a pig in shit dealing with lighthouses and light vessels and buoys and dealing with drawings and doing CAD, which is computer aided design. They were just in their element, and big ups to those people because we need people in this. It's a very important job. But that's just, for me, it was just a matrix job because I hated it. I lasted a year and a half, and at the start, it was okay. But very quickly, I realized that the 9 to 5 office routine wasn't for me. And on top of that, it included going to college 2 nights a week to study advanced maths and advanced science. And at 18 years old, it was just too much. Too much for me anyway. Wasn't my career path. Didn't light me up on the inside. So I actually woke up whilst I was at work. What started to happen? The thing that really did it for me was getting taxed. And I'm like, where are 20% of my wages going before I even have anything to do with it? You know, it's just disappearing, vanishing into the ether. I'm like, what do I actually get back for that? I'm already paying national insurance. To some degree, I can understand that. You know, if I ever needed the police or an ambulance or the fire service, that in my mind was what the national insurance was for. It doesn't even go to those services when you actually follow all of the money, but that's what I had in mind. I was like, yeah, I can understand the national insurance, fair dues, but the tax, what am I getting back for that? So that started me off. And I started getting into the national debt. And I'm like, holy shit, we are getting screwed over here, something fierce. It's like even way back then, you're talking 12 years ago now, back in 2012. It's like the national debt was like 50, 60 billion pounds. That's the interest. The interest on the national debt every year, way back then, was something ridiculous like that. And I'm just like, I'm getting taxed to pay the interest on this fucking debt. This is bullshit, man. So that's what started me off. But then I had this defining moment. I was in work, should have been working, but I was slacking and reading stuff anyway online. And it was some article on the BBC about the economy or about banking or whatever. And that's when I had my awakening. And I never forget this moment. I can't remember exactly what I was reading, but I never forget the moment. It's stuck with me since. I had this wave of energy flow up the back of my head and my neck and came all the way to like the very top of my head. And it was like this ding, aha moment. And that's how I woke up. And I can't remember exactly how it sort of happened. I'm pretty sure I was the first in my friendship group, but I don't remember waking up. At least most of my friends. But it wasn't too long after that moment when nearly all of us are awake. And then I do remember one moment, my friend Darby, absolute legend. I love Darby. I saw him wake up. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. When I watched the penny drop, we're at one of my friend's house, muffins. His parents are away, and we, doing what we were doing, partying, and we're all in our circle, and we're getting on to 9/11, and we're like, Darby, 9/11, look, and there wasn't a plane that hit the World Trade Center at 7, and all this, and I just saw the penny drop in his eyes, like ding. I watched my friend Darby wake up. It was such a beautiful moment. But I was very grateful to have that small group of friends. There's only about 8 or 10 of us, and we were all awake, and that was so nice to have that small community at that time, because way back then, 2012, the awakened community was much, much smaller than it is right now. We didn't have our own festival circuit as we do now. We didn't have the incredible community that we did now. We didn't have the numbers that we do now. But there was still people that were awake, and it wasn't too long after I woke up that I started getting on these Facebook pages, and I was very, very grateful way back then for these Facebook pages And I'll get into that in a little bit. But what happened when I first woke up is, I'm sure many of you will resonate with this. I had my romantic rebellious phase, and I was just telling everybody about my awakening journey. It didn't matter if I saw you on the train or if you was at a party with me or even just ruining family dinners. Everyone had to know about 9/11 and the banking system and how we're all getting screwed over. And I think there was some positives that came from this. I did make a few connections with people that resonated with what I was talking about and agreed. I do think I didn't make any progress with my family, and ruining the dinners maybe in hindsight wasn't such a smart idea, but there we go. I think a lot of people go through this phase, but I learned a very hard lesson here is you can't wake someone else up. But we'll touch on that a little bit later. So after or during my romantic rebellious phase, I created my first ever Facebook page. And this Facebook page was created in January 2013. My first taste of using social media outside of just personal use. And I got the first 100 to 1,000 followers on this page from my romantic rebellious phase, telling everybody about it and being like, hey, look, I have this page and I share this stuff. And one of my original intentions for creating it was I was so grateful way back then for the people that were on Facebook and they had their own pages and they were sharing all of this awake content, because I don't know where I would have been without that. It was so useful, so helpful, and I'm so grateful that people took the time to do that. I was like, I want to give back, and that's how it started, and gained momentum. And back in 2013, the Facebook algorithm was a lot friendlier, so it was far easier to grow a page. And within a year, I had 50,000 likes. You know, I'm like 18, 19. Just playing around my phone and my computer, shit posting really, but it's all sort of awake or spiritual content. And I didn't really know the power that it had, reaching hundreds of thousands of people a week. In hindsight, if I'd had a little bit more of a business mindset, I could have built this page and used YouTube and everything else and built that into an entire movement that I could have used to live off for the rest of my life. And also it could have been an incredibly powerful tool in the awakening, but it served its purpose. It gave me a taste for what it's like to be on the online world and have a page go viral. And I created my first ever website during this period, had my first taste of making money online, created my first videos and got, you know, what it's like to be in talking online, putting myself out there, although I was just talking over pictures. The videos are still on YouTube. Nice little bit of history there to visit them. This was my first online waves. Now, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, after waking up, I mean, a lot of people, what happens is their life falls apart and then they wake up. For me, it was slightly different. I had kind of a soft awakening, to be honest. But then my life fell apart. But that was in large part because of my own stupid decisions. But because I was going on this awakening journey, I realized we're getting screwed over. It comes to this crescendo point where I quit my job and tried to do some other stupid shit to make money, and it all fell apart. And life was very, very hard. 2014 to 15 was the hardest period of my life. But maybe I had to go through that. Who knows? I mean, it's easy to look back and think, wow, you know, could have done that differently, could have done this, but it's made me who I am today. It's made me the man I am today. So I went through this, but during the most difficult part of my life, there was some beautiful moments of light. And one of those was discovering Qigong. Now, before getting into Qigong, I should mention shortly after waking up politically, I woke up spiritually and I got into meditation and started practicing. But it was sort of here and there. It wasn't very structured. But I got some benefit, and I also was reading a bit about spirituality back then. And I'm very glad that I had the two awakenings quite close to each other, because I think they're both very, very important. But right when I'm, you know, just over the peak of the worst part of my life, this magic moment happened. Now, me and a friend, we'd been on a bit of a bender, and we'd actually been up all night, and we get to the beach and it's starting to, you know, it's getting sunny, and we see this woman just sitting, meditating about 20 feet to the right of us. You know, and we couldn't believe our eyes. In my town, Harwich, Essex, you never see just someone sitting down and meditating. But obviously we were quite fixated, and we went over and spoke to this woman. It turns out she's like this guru who's been doing meditation, qigong, yoga 25 years, and she's just about to start these classes in my hometown and the surrounding areas, these qigong classes. And it was about 3 days after meeting her, I end up going around her house, meeting her partner, and being initiated into qigong. What a wonderful modality this is. Specifically Zen Qigong. There's many different kinds of Qigong. That was the lineage that I was introduced to. Very grateful that this all happened. And from that point, she basically took me under her wing as her apprentice, because I think in large part, I brought the average age of the classes down significantly. I was like 19 at the time, and everyone in the class was, 40, 50 plus. So this was really, really good for me. And she had 3 classes a week. I went to nearly every single one of those for a year, as well as getting private tutoring just round her house, chilling with her and her partner. And I really, really went deep into Qigong. This activated me psychically in many different ways. And it was so good for me just to have that light, that embodiment during a very tough period of my life. I'm so, so grateful to my Qigong teacher, Ruth. Thank you so much for just being who you are and doing what you do. So after the dark night of the soul sort of came to a conclusion and I recovered, and skipped forward to January of 2016, I decided it's time to travel the world. And I had the intention, I'm just going to go to Australia for 1 year. But I just got a one-way ticket. I'm just like, it's going to go to Australia. No idea where I'm going to go, what I'm going to do, but I just know I need to go there and see what happens. So I get there, and as I'm flying into the Gold Coast, I see all these beautiful trees and hills and mountains, and I was so blown away. I did not expect that. I don't know what I expected. I just expected beaches and whatever you expect when you think of Australia, but I did not expect all of this lush, basically like rainforest, like subtropical rainforest. Absolutely stunning. I'm like, that's where I want to go. And I had the most incredible time in Australia. And it was always just one step ahead, planning one step ahead. A lot of Helpex, which is a brilliant, brilliant website for travelers. I had such a brilliant time. Not only did I really enjoy myself and develop myself and just have all of these wonderful experiences, I also managed to knock off all of my addictions one by one. I always had this intention that before I was 21, I wanted to be stop drinking and stop smoking anyway, and everything else. And it all just came together over the course of that year. And you're talking, I used to be addicted to tobacco, to ecstasy, to alcohol, to weed, to caffeine. I knocked them all off, and I was very, very happy about that. And then so it came to the end of that year, and I'm like, I'm not ready to go home yet. New Zealand's right next door. Only seems right. We're going to have to go there. And it was 2 years in New Zealand. That's definitely the closest to paradise that I've found so far. But during that period, I was completely sober, apart from Amanita muscaria, and I cover at least one of my experiences a little bit later. Completely sober. To go from that to, intoxicated every single day in one way or another for a very long period of time was a massive milestone for me. And it's definitely worth mentioning that within the first few months of being in New Zealand, I did the Vipassana course. Now, many of you listening probably know what that is, but just in case you don't, it's a 10-day meditation course. And you think, that sounds kind of nice, kind of relaxing. 10 days of meditation in the beautiful New Zealand bush, surrounded by nothing but nature. Sounds great. Well, it's one hell of a course, because it's 10 hours of meditation every day. At 4 a.m., some fucker with a gong is outside your room, bang, 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 and you're supposed to wake up, and by 4:30, you're meant to be meditating. And there's no reading, there's no writing, there's no electronics, there's no talking, there's no sex, and they actually, men and women are split up. There's not even really supposed to be eye contact. There's nothing, just you and your mind. The first 3 days, the physical pain was so intense. Your body is just screaming at you. It doesn't want to be sitting down for this long, 10 hours a day. And, some of it's in your room, on your bed, but a lot of it's in this hall. And even though you've got cushions, It's still very uncomfortable. I never forget. There was this guy. He built a mountain of cushions. There's no one telling you how many cushions you can use, but he literally, this guy is sitting on like 10 cushions. So he's basically like sitting on a chair. He's like that elevated. He still didn't look comfortable. Very funny though. But yeah, this course, it's very good. I actually do recommend people to do it, apart from the discourse at the end of the day, because they sort of softly try and convert you to Buddhism, and they have some beliefs that I don't agree with. And when it's the only voice you're hearing, you're tired, you're in this vulnerable state or open state of, lots of meditation. I do think your subconscious defenses are a little bit weaker than usual. And to be hit with this loud voice and speakers when it's the only voice you're hearing, for me, that's my only real criticism, because other than that, it's a really good course. You will learn more about yourself. You will improve your meditation technique. I did, because for me, as I was already into meditation beforehand, I was just sort of practicing here and there, though, I found great benefit from the body scan technique. Now, this is the technique that I recommend to all beginners, every single person who's looking to get into meditation. This is now what I teach them, and it's body scanning. That's what Vipassana is. You just focus on the top of your head and scan all of your body, go all the way to your feet, and then back up again, up and down, up and down. Very, very good technique. But I tell you what, after the first 3 days, the physical pain isn't such an issue. It's more the emotional roller coaster. There'll be moments where it's like absolute peace and serenity, and you're like, wow, this is incredible. 10 minutes later, you're like, oh my fucking God, get me out of here. I can't deal with this shit. What am I doing? I just want to run out the door. So it's very much like this. And, I had trouble sleeping, and it's a slog. It's a real slog, but it is a very, very powerful course. But anyway, so after completing that course, I mean, they say you should meditate 2 hours every day for the rest of your life. And when I first left, I did that for quite some time, but then I started to bring it down to 1 hour, and then I got to about half an hour. And I maintained that half an hour practice every day for about a year. And I found great benefit from that. Even to this day, I am still reaping the benefits, reaping the rewards of having that consistent meditation practice. And now I say to people, I don't think you need to meditate every single day for the rest of your life. It's probably going to be good for you if you did. It's not going to do you any harm. And maybe you will reach some very high spiritual heights. However, I think what is necessary is just at least a period of your life where you do meditate consistently for an extended period of time. Because you can look at the science and how your brain starts to change, but also I think it changes your aura, changes your vibe. You develop a very high level of awareness of yourself, of your thoughts, of your surroundings. And that stuck with me, especially the awareness. So loads of meditation in New Zealand, sobriety. I discovered that I can do rap music and start getting into that. And I start my first novel, and I restart my website and start writing my own content online in the form of articles. And all of it really sort of started and came together in many ways during New Zealand. Then I come back after 2 years and into Europe for a year, and I could talk on and on and on about all of the wonderful experiences I had whilst traveling the world. And I'm sure there's another journey like that. There's one more at least left in me. But then after all of this traveling for 4 years, I had this great intuition. It's time to come back to the UK. And within 2 months coming back, it was lockdowns and COVID hit, and everything seemed like it was going to shit. So I thought, well, what the fuck am I going to do now? Well, I just found a nice HelpX, the website that I was using to travel the world, and found a nice one of those just north of London. And when things started to get real serious in terms of the mandates, my activism self reignited, and I started getting into videos, and I created this thing called the Resistance UK. And my life was still pretty chill, but then everything turned on its head when the Great Reopening happened. Now, you may know what this is. Back in January of 2021, things were looking pretty dark. Boris is like, yeah, we'll lock down till April, nah, July, nah, September. It just looked like we was going to be locked down forever. And quite a few people were putting their hopes on the Trump presidency, that maybe he's going to, somehow save us. And when he lost the White House, it really did seem like all hope is lost. It's like the last beacon of hope. It's going to be locked down forever. What do we do? I remember feeling quite distraught. I admit, I was like, hopefully Trump can do something. So when he lost the presidency, it was quite a distressing time. And I remember seeing in Italy, we were seeing these videos come out. And at the time, this was revolutionary, of these people sitting in a restaurant with no masks, clapping and cheering, because they're all supposed to be closed and nobody's supposed to be doing that. It was really, really powerful to see that. We start hearing these rumors that the businesses are opening en masse in Italy. And there was, crazy numbers, like thousands and thousands and thousands of businesses apparently in Italy were opening against the government. We have no idea if that was true or if it was just a few, but definitely some did, because we got that video. And I remember seeing this post on Telegram that some random person had just put up, and it was around like the 15th, 16th of January, and it was like the great reopening. It's happening on the 30th of January, and this is, in the UK. And I remember seeing that and thinking, nice idea, but you need better marketing. That post kind of sucks. It needs this, it needs that. Then a few days later, it came up again, and I thought, I'm going to create a Telegram group. Nobody seems to be taking ownership of this movement. It's just whatever. There's a couple of little memes here and there. And holy shit, I created this Telegram group, and my entire life flipped on its head. It went from pretty chill, just making the odd video here and there, and doing my thing on the Resistance UK, and then working at my HelpX, to 16 to 18 hours every single day. The Telegram group went viral instantly on the same day. It got picked up by a few influencers, and just boom, Pandora's box was opened. My life has never been the same since. The YouTube's getting millions of views. We get mentioned on the UK column. Sky News wanted an interview. We end up getting like over 100 Telegram groups all over the country. Ireland's got its own division, its own little thing happening over there. It was madness. Ended up with a team of 50 admins. It just all came together so fast. It required so much work. It was just all day, every day. I was getting endless notifications. Endless. I'm not kidding. I thought about my times of when I used to be quite a gamer back in the day, and the level of concentration and the amount of stimulation that happens, and you've got to be reacting to stimulus incredibly quickly. It's like, that actually prepared me in a way for what I was experiencing in the Great Reopening. Imagine it's like this: ding, 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 for the entire period that you're awake. And obviously you go to sleep and it's still going on, but ding, 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 ding. I remember putting my phone in my backpack and just hearing this noise and just walking up this little street and just thinking to myself, what have I done here? It's just ding, 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 endless notifications. It was absolutely a mad time. But basically, in hindsight again, 10 days is not enough time to start a peaceful revolution of the mind. But that was the objective. It was started on the 20th of January, and on the 30th of January, we're going to open up all the businesses in this peaceful revolution of the mind in defiance of the lockdown mandates. Now, 10 days is not enough time to pull something like that off. I learned that the hard way. We did have some success, though. Some businesses opened. And also, it ignited a passion and a spirit in the freedom fighters that were already in the cause, fighting the good fight. I remember speaking to one of the leaders, Vince, a few months later, and he was telling me about this time, and he was like, that was when the real fight back began. There were protests that still started in 2020 towards the end, around August and September and that period, but I remember him saying that to me. But that catapulted me to the upper echelons of the UK activist scene. And before I knew it, I was talking to all of the leaders of the biggest activist groups in the country. And there was this defining moment, literally like something out of a movie. So as I was, the person in touch with all the businesses, one of the business owners, this beautiful, awesome woman, let us use her property. And we get together and we have the first in-person meeting of all these activist leaders coming together. And it was just so cool, so awesome to be sitting at this table with all these awesome people that we had such power at that time, and we're trying to figure out how to save the country. Even we took all of our phones and put them in some like metal cooker in another room just to get rid of, it was really like top secret, this meeting. It was quite a time. And that was how Unite for Freedom was started, at least in that way. And then we ended up with this that you're seeing on screen now. That is a real photo. That is one of the many massive protests that happened in London. And there's only the core team was about 10 people. And then on days like this, we had some marshals, but you're talking between 20 to 30 people trying to organize and lead hundreds of thousands, and at our biggest, over 1 million people, telling them where to go, to follow a route, and planning what we're going to do. We did some crazy stuff. We had party trucks at the end of some of the marches, and so many amazing things happened, but also it was very tough, very challenging. I think these are all the activists. These are the rebels. They don't want to be told what to do. They don't want to be told where to go, but somebody has to try and lead this incredible army of freedom fighters. But wow, what a scene it was, especially at the time. This was when you'd go into the supermarket and you'd be the only motherfucker not wearing a mask. But you'd go to London and there's this endless ocean of freedom fighters completely unmasked. Honestly, it really reignited my passion and love for this country, to see all of these wonderful, amazing freedom fighters together fighting for freedom. We really pulled our finger out. When shit hit the fan, this country pulled its finger out, and it doesn't get enough credit because we really did kick into gear, and it was incredible to be a part of it. But you imagine, I'm at the front of my megaphone, like, this way, and man. And the police were quite helpful, to be honest. I know the police get a lot of stick, and some of it's well deserved because they're just following orders like robots. However, on the days of these protests, they were very respectful. I never had any trouble, and I'm at the front leading this fucking thing. But what would happen is, in real time, they're trying to figure out where we're going. We never told them the route. There was this theory that we're working with the police and we give them the route. We never gave them the route. We're supposed to, but we never did. We never gave them the route. But in real time, they're figuring out where we're going. And what they would do is they would go ahead on their bikes and clear the path. Actually, very useful. They'd get rid of the traffic, stop the people getting in the way. Very, very useful, I tell you. They were kind of like working for us. They were kind of like marshals. But people are like, why are you following the police, man? Well, we want to go this way. And it's like, fuck's sake, we've got this route. They're just in real time figuring out where we're going. Actually, very helpful. And this is where we need to go. Thankfully, every single time we did manage to get the people where they were supposed to, apart from once when it all just fell apart and I was going blue in the face trying to shout at people, telling them where to go, and never mind. But on the whole, yeah, very incredible experience, and we were very, very successful in what we did. So now moving on a bit, there is more to the story, but you could talk forever just on that. I basically have transitioned to living the life of my dreams. And I'm not saying my life is perfect, and my life definitely still had challenges. However, during my time traveling the world, occasionally I'd see these people, these digital nomads, and they're doing something they love on their laptop and they're getting money for it, and it's enough for them to be able to travel, and they're having such a good time. And I just looked at them, I was like, look at that level of freedom. That is like the pinnacle of the modern age, the modern era. Being able to work anytime, any place, and be able to travel the world at the same time. Incredible. And I'm very happy to say that I managed to get there. But as well, it's not just that I had any old job, it's working on projects and passions that light me up inside, that I truly believe in. I could never be a social media manager for McDonald's, for example, because my heart's just not in it. My passion's just not in it. It's just not me. But I've built up my skills over these past 12 years. I've built up my network, and I've created different movements and brands and so on, that it's come together that I do now earn enough money to be able to live from this. And it's a very defining moment because it increases your ability to grow and develop exponentially. If what you're doing for work also It's how you're learning new skills. It's how you're fulfilling your higher purpose. It's all of this comes together. Then it's a massive turning point when you can work on it full time. But it took a lot of work to get here. It's been a very tough journey in many ways. But now I very much am living the life of my dreams. And for example, recording this presentation is just me in my fucking element. Doing that talk in Buxton was me in my element. I loved it and it helps people. So if I can do it, anybody else can. But what you do, what you living your life of your dreams is like, what it looks like will be different to what mine is like. But I got there and I'm so grateful now when I look back. And I look back over the 10 years roughly since I quit my job at Trinity House and how hard it was. But I got to the place I wanted to get to. So I'm so grateful for that. And it's an embodiment of this spiritual law that I found to be true, which is basically a test in faith. And that's jump and the net will appear. Might take some time, might not appear straight away, but it's there and it will guide you, protect you, and love you. But you've got to have that faith and courage to be able to live your path of the heart and take that leap. Right now, so time to get into politics. Right, so the most important political issues at the moment. What is the climate con and why should everyone be concerned about water fluoridation? The Climate Con. Now, if you haven't checked it out already, go to thegreatclimatecon.com and see this awesome movement that I've started. I'm really, really happy with this. This came about after COVID sort of calmed down and that narrative looked like it was dying and almost dead. And I was thinking to myself, what's the enemy's next big play? Now, this seemed like the next biggest narrative, but it's slightly different. COVID came in with a bang and left with a bang. But this has been building up for decades, and it's one of their golden geese of our enemy's agenda. And there's so much to this because it infiltrates and seeps into every part of our life. They are weaponizing the climate in every single way that they can. Primarily, it's just to get people scared and shame and guilt them for being alive and enjoying stuff and driving and just being a human. That's like the main objective, but then there's so many other tertiary objectives of this agenda. And you can see it playing out in just things like the closing of Port Talbot's steel production in the name of climate change, and then replacing it with a far less efficient electronic version of a steel furnace, which isn't able to heat up as high and is unable to produce as high quality steel. That's just one example, but this is playing out all over the country in all different industries. In the name of saving the planet, we're destroying our civilization. In the name of preserving our society, we're destroying our society. It's all backwards and inverted. And there's things like chopping down 17 million trees to put some more wind turbines in Scotland, even though those same wind turbines have been shown to be powered by diesel fuel. All of this ridiculousness, and it's led to the UK being a world leader in electricity prices. It's also led to the demonization of fossil fuels, which may not actually be fossil fuels, but that's another story for another time, which then ties into transportation and just everything. And as more taxes are imposed, and there's even talk of some ridiculous carbon tax, it's just so much. The list goes on and on and on. So you got to pick your battles wisely, and that's why I've chosen to dedicate a lot of my time and effort into fighting the climate con. So the key points, as I've been mentioning, that it's being weaponized to attack our economy, food supply, and quality of life in general. Renewable energy mostly sucks. Paul Burgess is a great resource on this. Definitely check out his YouTube channel. But we had a great show on the Climate Con, and that was actually on the Open One podcast, and we had a very lengthy discussion. But he's so good on the renewable energy, especially wind turbines. He really laid into them. And as I mentioned, fossil fuels, they might not come up from fossils at all and might actually be better named as hydrocarbons and originate from, quote, renewable sources, quote unquote, because might just be that they're far more abundant than we're told. I'm deep into a book called The Deep Hot Biosphere, and I'll be back with a further conclusion once I'm able to provide one. So another big one is that meat, dairy, and cows and their farts and burps are not a threat. See, this is an attack on the food supply, but primarily meat and dairy from cows. Probably because it's one of the most nutrient-dense sources of food that we have available. Personally, I feel incredibly good when I eat high-quality red meat, and I eat plenty of dairy too, but I try and get the best quality of that I can, always searching for the next nearest source of raw milk. Another big one is we actually want more CO2. Now, this is so fascinating because there's so much bullshit around CO2. The fact that it's actually been portrayed as some deadly killer gas, when in fact it's the gas of life. Plants love it. That's why it's pumped into greenhouses at very high levels, because the more CO2 that's available, the quicker food grows, which means that the higher the levels of CO2 in the atmosphere and the parts per million means that crops grow faster. And there's also this incredible greening effect that's happening on the planet right now because of the increased CO2. And the fact is, CO2 is increasing regardless of what we do, because most of the CO2 that's entering the atmosphere right now is coming from natural sources. It's a very tiny percentage that's coming from humanity, and of that, the UK is such a tiny portion of that tiny portion. It's negligible, and even if the UK was to vanish off the face of the planet, it would make absolutely fuck all difference to the CO2 entering the atmosphere. So you have to wonder why all of this carbon footprint stuff exists, and what's the actual true agenda. Most of us know what it is. And another one, a bit warmer planet would be amazing for plant, animal, and human life. I mean, especially here in the UK, where it's cloudy nearly every single day and it's pretty chilly, even now, even in June, the time of this recording, it's the middle of June and it's freezing. I'm still walking outside with a jacket on. It hasn't really, summer just hasn't really hit, and it sucks. I mean, I can deal with it, used to this country, but a bit warmer weather would be really, really nice for morale and just in general. But that's not even getting into the actual benefits that plant life, animal, and human life would see from a warmer planet. And I'm not talking significantly warmer, just a little bit warmer, and things would be really, really good. Obviously, it can get too hot, but cold is the killer. Cold is the killer of life. We don't want it to get colder, that's for sure. We want things to be a bit warmer. And something is definitely happening to us guys involving planes. Now, the jury is out on exactly what's going on. Some people think it's pilots that have signed an NDA and they're pushing buttons and spraying shit. Other people think it's something that's been added to the fuel and it's coming at the back of the engines, and it's causing these trails in the sky that aren't contrails because they seem to stick around, and when there's enough of them, it can be very heavy and it can block out the sky and the sun and create clouds. So whatever's happening, whatever exactly the mechanism is, we're not exactly sure. There's many different theories and lots of debates on that. But what is for sure happening is something's happening with the planes that's blocking out the sun, which is very important if you're in an already very grey country like the UK. So just to put it very clearly, very simply, more CO2 is more food. I really like this graph, and I'm a big fan of the CO2 coalition. In fact, the first episode of the ClimateCon podcast was Gregory Wrightstone, the executive director of the CO2 coalition, and they have loads of great resources on there you can dig your teeth into and just get the facts on CO2. Highly recommend everybody checks that out. And so as I was diving deep into the ClimateCon when I started the movement, I mean, I'd already had a bit of an understanding. I knew this was part of their agenda, but the best perspective that came out of this for me was actually realizing that humanity is not a blight on the planet. In fact, we're not destroying this place. Okay, there are problems with pollution and plastic. I'm not going to deny that. We have got stuff to sort out. But on the whole, actually, it's not the end of the world. Things are actually looking pretty damn good for a lot of the planet and the species. More CO2 is good. The earth is greening. A lot of species are actually recovering and doing quite well once we've realized we can actually maintain them, like polar bears, for example. But that was a big perspective for me, because it shifts it from fear and doom, like we're all about to die and we should just sit in a dark room with the lights off and just stop existing to save the planet. When actually we're not such a blight on the planet. Maybe we're here for a reason, and maybe the planet actually quite enjoys having this very advanced creature living upon it, as it looks at us like some sort of child. But it's not the end of the world. In fact, we're entering into a time of incredible abundance and prosperity, and it's an amazing time to be alive. That is one of the most powerful perspectives that came from this for me. And also the fact that fossil fuels might not be fossil was a big part of that. So I'm so into fighting back against this bullshit narrative that I've actually created a book. Now, this book started out as an ebook, and I created it in a very short period of time with an incredible amount of effort in about a 2 week period. It was mad, actually, how quickly this came about. AI helped me a little bit with creating some of the lists and getting the structure, but I'd say nearly every single word you read there that isn't a list has come from me, and that's why it's got this spin on it. It's kind of funny. But it was a testament to the power of what you can do with AI and also a lot of hard work, like a lot of focused, really focused work. It's all right to say, yeah, I worked 10 hours today. But how much of that 10 hours was actually completely focused in the moment work? And that's what went into this book for 2 weeks. But anyway, anybody who wants to get into the climate con narrative but doesn't know where to start, maybe you're not a scientist like me, you're just a layman who's kind of interested but doesn't have the comprehensive scientific background. You don't need it because this book breaks it down in a very simple to understand way. So simple, in fact, that any child that is being hit with the climate con narrative in school could read this book as a counter to the bullshit. That's how simple it is, just to break down all of these complex subjects in simple to understand ways, highlight the key points of the narrative. I mean, it is just a beginner's guide. It's just under 100 pages long, but it covers everything you need to know. But there's so much more. There could easily be a part two to this book because there's a lot to cover. But this covers what I believe are the most important things for everybody to know. So it was started out as an ebook last year, and just the time of this recording, days prior, I finished what I'm hoping to be the final version. And tomorrow, actually, this is going to land. I'm going to get the final version, hopefully, and there'll be no more new amendments that need to be made. And it's going to get launched as a hard copy, which is so exciting because I know you guys, like me, most people actually want to hold a book in their hands when they read it. So this is really, really cool. Coming out soon. The Beginner's Guide to the Climate Con, your handbook for navigating climate lies. If you go to thegreatclimatecon.com, sign up to the mailing list, you will be the first to know when this drops in hard copy format. And follow the Climate Con on Telegram, Instagram, Facebook. We're prolific on there. And the username is just at the Climate Con. I mean, Telegram's the best one, or even X actually, but Telegram is definitely the best because of the lack of censorship. Instagram, unfortunately, has censored us pretty hard. Same with Facebook. In fact, I can't even post the website on Instagram or Facebook because it's actually been completely censored, and I get a warning message that tells me you can't post this website. But Telegram, there's no problem with that. But the mailing list is the best thing to sign up to, and you can find that on the website. Now, on to what I believe is another very important political problem that we are facing, and that's the quality of water. And here we have the Fluoride Free Alliance UK, founded by an amazing woman and good friend of mine and a colleague over the years, Joy Warren. She's been in this fight for decades and is still going to this day. And there's still a fight happening, but she's been instrumental. I don't know where we would be in the fight against fluoride if it wasn't for Joy Warren. Big love to you, Joy. We have this flyer that yours truly made, and this is the front of it. And it's just, I think it's quite a nice design. Got a picture of a glass of water looking kind of cool, purple colors with a big warning sign about fluoride on it. And this flyer is dedicated to the fact that the Northeast is the first target for water fluoridation for a long time. Many people don't know we've actually had many, many victories against the rollout of water fluoridation over the past 5 to 6 decades. Over 50 victories all around the country, different cities and counties, and even all of Wales and all of Scotland. Only 10% of England right now currently has water fluoridation, and they want to fluoridate the whole country. It's interesting. It's fascinating because for some reason, the UK is the last bastion of the Anglosphere world that isn't heavily fluoridated. 98% of Europe have banned water fluoridation. 98%. But for some reason, the Anglosphere world has been targeted for this measure. Don't know why exactly. Leave that to you guys to think about why. It's interesting. The USA Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and Ireland have all fallen to the hands of the water fluoridationists, all very heavily fluoridated the public water supply. And a terrible shame that is. And only 10% of England currently has it, but if they get their way, then the entire country will be fluoridated. So we have to take action now to stop that. And there is something that everybody can do. But just to cover, the kind of fluoride being used is hexafluorosilicic acid, a byproduct of the phosphate fertilizer industry. It is hazardous waste. Now, there are different kinds of fluoride. Natural fluoride actually isn't that bad. And then sodium fluoride is definitely not good. Definitely don't want that anywhere near our water. But then the kind that's being used now, hexafluorosilicic acid, is a toxic waste product. If you see it, how it's transported, big metal containers with a big warning sign saying, don't get this anywhere near your person because you will die. It's seriously toxic. We don't want it near our water. And if you haven't joined the Fluoride Free Alliance yet, you want to check out the networks. There is the brilliant website set up by Joy, which is the hub, the main hub, and that's ukffa.org.uk. And then there's a website specifically designed for the water fluoridation consultation happening in the Northeast, and that's newfc.org.uk. That may change soon after this consultation, but you can still find it there because at the moment, what's happening is there's a public consultation. Everyone around the country can fill it out, should fill it out, who's opposed to water fluoridation, and it's ending on the 17th of June. So just after this recording is published, the podcast show is out there, will be the end of the public consultation. So if you haven't already, fill it out as soon as possible. And you can find a brilliant guide on all of that on the newfc.org.uk. We have an entire page full of loads of information that you need to read to be able to fill out the consultation with your best possible response. Everybody who wants a fluoride-free water supply must fill that consultation out. And if you haven't already, join the Telegram, Instagram, and Facebook. Telegram is really, really great for the Fluoride Free Alliance. There's an awesome group on there, an awesome community, and Joy is in the group on hand to answer any of the questions you may have. And you can find that if you just search Fluoride Free UK, or on Instagram, search Fluoride Free Alliance UK. All right, so that's all of the politics out of the way. Now for what I like to call the good stuff. And a main focus point of the talk that I delivered in Buxton and this podcast is all of these political problems are important to combat. Like one would put a plaster on an open wound. However, these problems are merely symptoms of a greater spiritual problem we face as a collective. To see long-lasting positive change, to truly win and secure a future of fun, freedom, and all things good in life, we have to evolve spiritually. And I'm going to break down what that means, or at least get into it, because there's so much to this amazing, complex subject. And this is why the main focus of my work right now is what I like to call spirituality without the bullshit. And here is my motto, if you like. This is on my website. And hear me out if you are religious or you have a belief system that's working for you, because I have a disclaimer, but I say that religion is boring and outdated. The new age is fluffy and superficial. Where do seekers go for depth without dogma, illumination without deception? Spiritual eclecticism is the answer. The best of all worlds without the bullshit. You can call it the cherry-picked way. That's what I teach. And there's some cherries there if you're only listening to the audio. So, big disclaimer here. I'm not here to convert anybody. If you have a spiritual faith that's working for you, I believe that's the most important thing for anybody to have. I don't need everybody believing what I believe for my beliefs to work. I'm not interested in converting people. Just if you are religious or you have a strong spiritual faith that's working, perhaps some of what I'm going to share will be interesting and you could add it to your perspectives. But the main people that I'm looking to help here are people that don't have a spiritual belief system in any way, shape, or form. I believe that is one of the most damaging things as a human, is to not have any kind of spiritual faith, foundational belief. And I see why a lot of people have strayed away from religion. In fact, Christianity is in massive decline in the UK. Less than 50% of people identify as Christian, and that number seems to show no signs of going anywhere else but down. It was 90% plus when you look back in previous years, and it's declining at a very fast rate. And I can see why. So I'm going to get into why. So the main issues I believe we have with religion are the fact that it's undoubtedly true. Religion has been used to control the population throughout the centuries. And it does this in a variety of ways. I think one of the main ways that it goes about it is that it removes an internal connection to God. It's always external. There is no God inside. God is always outside. I think that's a very, very important distinction to make and a very big issue with religion. It also instilled poverty consciousness on a very, very deep level. And I'm mainly going to lay into Christianity here because that is or was the religion of my nation and most of the West. But poverty consciousness is very prevalent. It seems to demonize money, and anybody who's rich is automatically assumed to be evil, when I've actually seen and lived that to be false. In fact, the people that have hurt me the most have been absolutely broke. I've been robbed by broke chavs and spent time with millionaires, and even once ate dinner with a billionaire. And I tell you what, they were some of the nicest people I've ever met. In fact, this one millionaire woman, she was so generous because she could be generous because she had the money to be generous. So not that you need money to be a good person, but it seems to amplify who you are. So I don't believe money is an issue, but if you wanted to control the population and you wanted to keep them poor and subservient, instilling a deep poverty consciousness belief system into the collective consciousness is a good way to do that. I get into this quite deeply in my book. As I say, this talk is merely just skimming the surface of some of spirituality. And another big point is how I believe religion is far too restricting sexually. And now this is a big issue, and that's probably why religion has pretty much lost the youth, is that it's far too restricting sexually, but it also sort of demonizes sex in many ways. And these urges and impulses are evil and to be squashed down and all of this. And I think that's led to many, many issues, but it breaks people away from their bodies. And if you wanted to control people and keep them in shame and guilt and fear, well, what a great way to do that, by breaking them away from their own sexuality. So that ties into the next point, which is major guilt and shame programming leading to lack of self-love. And if people don't love themselves, if they believe that they are inherently evil just for being born and having desires that come with being a human, then they are living in guilt, living in shame, will more easily accept anything you want to tell them and be better programmable slaves to your system. So unfortunately, I think that's a big part of it too. And here's an interesting one that I never really hear people speak about, but it's worth mentioning, is that the guidelines for life, for religion, all of these texts were written when most people were dead by the age of 30 and basically nobody could read or write. Now, if you know that most of these people aren't going to see their 30th birthday, if you know that they can't actually read or write, and in many ways they are intellectually stupid, they might still be smart as humans in general, but they're missing big parts of the intellect, and they're all going to be dead pretty soon. The guidelines for life would be written in such a way. It's a very different world. It's a very different guidelines for life if you know that your people you're writing to could easily live to 80, 90, or even 100. So just keep that in your mind. It's a very important distinction to make, I believe. And also, perhaps the biggest reason we're seeing Christianity decline is that humanity has actually evolved. I do believe that. Even though you might look around and think, oh, this world's fucked, these people are fucked. I think in general, these past 100 to 200 to 300 years, in large part, thanks to the Industrial Revolution and the massive raising of living standards and lifespans, I do believe humanity has actually evolved. People are smarter and wiser than they were previously, on the whole. There might be some extreme cases that would show you otherwise, but yeah, I do believe that's the case. And religion has remained stagnant. It's the same as it always been. That has been actually, it's possibly one of its biggest strengths and why it's continued on for so long. But it's just a very rigid lie, I would say. And the original texts have been lost, mistranslated, or deliberately altered throughout the ages. If I have got my knowledge right, we don't actually have the original texts for most of what's in the Bible. All of it's been lost, burnt, transformed, and now what we have are translations of translations that throughout the ages have had to have gone through what was accepted to be okay, the monarchy of the time decided what was okay, and so on. So there's so much mistranslation. We've lost the original text and perhaps a lot of the original wisdom and meaning that was in those texts. But with all of that, credit where credit is due, because we wouldn't be here in this society if it weren't for what Christianity has done. It's provided the bedrock foundation for so much of our society, and it has instilled some brilliant things into the collective consciousness, and we can thank Christianity and religion for that. One of those, perhaps the most important, is that religion has embedded the concept of God deep into our society. Everybody knows what God is to some degree. They may or may not believe in it. They may have different ideas of what they believe God is, but everyone knows what it is. And I honestly believe that we need God above our society in for it to function effectively. And there's a lot to be said about that. And it's also embedded morality deep into the psyche of the people. Even people who are atheists have morality, but they just might choose to go against it or not live by it. But they know when they're doing something that's wrong. They know when they're doing something that's going to hurt other people, but it benefits them. They know. They have this feeling. It's just there. And I think that has been because religion has just hammered it into people. Be a good person. This is right. This is wrong. And what a brilliant thing to have. Unfortunately, it seems to be being eroded, falling away a little bit, but maybe we can stop it from going too far. And that's partly what I cover in my book and coming up as well. So what also is very important to mention, and credit where credit's due, is the Bible has provided a framework for the law and legal system. Essentially, if you trace it back, our law and legal system originates from the Bible, and it's just been built upon from there. So that foundational pillar of society, foundational pillar of how things work here, can be traced back to the Bible, and credit where credit's due. And that's not just for the law and legal system, but in fact, Christianity/religion has just been a foundational pillar for the society we now enjoy, but are often so quick to hate. It's just provided this bedrock. And I say religion served the purpose. But I think for many, many people, myself included, that purpose has almost completely ended. Now we have to find something that's new and better. But the new age also has a lot of problems too, and I'll get into that shortly. But this is an interesting one. See what you think of this. I believe that with a lesser evolved population, a fear-based way of the spiritual path may well have been necessary to keep people in check. Basically, do as I say, or else you will go to hell and burn and suffer. Be a good person, live by God, or it's going to be a lifetime of suffering in hell. For lesser evolved people, I think this works. I think people that are lesser evolved generally benefit more from a more fear-based way of the spiritual path, just because they're closer to animals and it's instinctual, and fear is a good motivator for people in that level of consciousness. But the fact that the people have evolved, I think, leads to the fact that we need a more love-based approach. So here we get into what a lot of people get into when they fall away from religion, if they ever were into it, and that's the New Age. Now, I like a lot of the New Age, but I do believe a lot of it's a trap. And we're going to get into the main issues of the New Age. Now, these are some of them are a bit simple but important to highlight. It's an interesting one, like your clothes are what define your spirituality. There might be something to the colors you wear, but ultimately, what I realized, I mean, I don't wear trackies anymore, but I was just as spiritual when I was wearing trackies as when I was wearing my pink hippie Alibabas. I went through a phase of that, if you can believe it, especially in my Australia, New Zealand era. Let everything grow, very, very long beard and very long hair, and was wearing the classic hippie clothes. I went there for a while, but it didn't change anything. I was just as spiritual as when I was living in Harwich, wearing my trackies and looking like a chav. Now, this is a really, really big one. You need to be vegetarian or slash vegan to be spiritual. I see this all the time. I've debated endlessly on it, and I probably will be for the rest of my life, be it highlighting this issue because it's really been pumped out there. But I actually think this is complete bullshit. At least for me, I'm just as spiritual before a steak as after a steak. In fact, I feel more grounded, more vibrant, more alive when I consistently eat high quality, red meat. There is this absolute bullshit belief that for some reason you have to be a vegetarian or a vegan to be spiritual. I think for the most part, it's actually a new belief that is completely just plucked out of fucking nowhere. But there's so many holes in that. There's so many. I'm a living example, and many others are. There are many amazing spiritual beings out there, super evolved and intelligent. They are eating meat and they're still progressing on their spiritual journey. And I have seen so many vegetarians or especially vegans that really make me think that it's not working for them. They'll be like super skinny, low energy, and things just aren't working in their body. There's only been a tiny percentage of people that I've seen make it work for them, but I have to be honest, I have seen people that make veganism work for them, at least when I met them. But I think there's a very tiny percentage of the population who actually can make that diet work. On the whole, I see a lot of people that just don't look healthy, very ungrounded, and there's two contrasting images of people in my mind that I have when I look back on all the people that I've met who are vegan. One of them, fair enough to this man. He was this German guy in New Zealand. I got on with him very well. We disagreed on veganism. He was a vegan and he was built like a gorilla. He's quite hairy. We're working on this off-grid helpex, so I saw him lifting, moving stuff, and he'd have his top off, and he was like a bit of a gorilla, very strong. But then also in Portugal with this woman, and she was actually an English woman, and we hung out a bit, and I remember this one scene specifically. It will stay with me forever. We're on the beach. It's a lovely, beautiful day in Portugal on the Portuguese beach, and she was super skinny, man. She had no boobs at all, no figure. She was what you would define a rake, and lovely girl though. We got on very well, but just an embodiment of what can go wrong with veganism. And she just said to me, she's just like, "Do you just get tired like every day at around 2, 3 p.m.?" I just laugh. No, not at all. In fact, quite the opposite. In fact, I have so much energy, I have to do something with it, or it's very hard to sleep. Anyway, so another big issue is this comes up a lot, and it's just do what feels good, disregarding the intellect and only go off emotions. And it ties into spiritual bypassing, but spiritual bypassing is also a lot of other things, but this is a big part of it. It's just a very superficial, shallow, hollow spirituality that appeals to the ego and its laziness. And it's like anything that requires effort is just not the right thing to be doing. You just go with the flow. Everything should just happen with zero effort. I do nothing and close my eyes and think happy thoughts, and everything's just going to work out. It's such bullshit. So it's very important to highlight that. And also, a big problem I see in the new age is the misunderstanding of karma. And this doesn't come up that often, but you will hear this, or you may have heard it before, is that there are some people who just believe one day the bad guys, they're going to get their karma. We don't have to do anything because karma's going to sort it all out. This is such bullshit, and it comes from a misunderstanding of karma. And I do believe karma exists, but I think it's actually more of a teaching mechanism for people who are good. Because I do believe that on the higher levels, elite evil has chosen to be evil. It knows that it's evil. It wants to be evil. And we actually need some level of evil here right now on this planet for this human race, as we are at the moment, to be able to define what good is and to provide the friction for good people to learn and evolve from. So if we need evil, why would you punish evil for being evil? Bill Gates doesn't need to know what it's like to hurt another person with all of the evil stuff he does, because he knows what he's doing and he wants to do it, and that's his chosen path of evolution. That's the interesting thing. It's not considered too much. Is that evil has its own evolutionary path, as does good. But karma, I believe, is for people that are good. And when you do something that hurts somebody and you are a good person, you've chosen to be a good person, you will at some point, some way, somehow attract the lesson that's going to teach you how you made that person feel. That may happen this life, may happen next life, or you may actually, and this is rare, but I think it can happen, is evolve to the point where you can understand what you did and you know what you did was wrong, and you have the intention behind the fact you're never going to do it again because you've learned the lesson before karma had to come in and give you the kick up the ass to properly learn and understand it. That's what I believe karma is. So to sit back and just be like, yeah, we don't have to do anything. No worries, guys. Just one day evil's going to get his karma. It's just It's such bullshit. So this is also another point is that people find it very difficult to actually speak about negativity. It's like, oh my God, negativity. I just think complete happy thoughts. Don't even think about how evil operates. Anytime you think about evil in any regard, it's just giving them more of your energy and attention. Now, there's definitely a balance. If you were to overly obsess about evil and consistently have it in your reality, that would start to have an impact. But you can calmly, objectively observe what the plans of evil are and think about how you can navigate that and counter that, and it's not going to destroy you. So, negativity, it's okay to be aware of it, to understand it, and it's also okay to have a bad day and just be all right. It's, the journey isn't a straight upward progression. So negativity is not nothing to be feared. You just gotta know how to navigate it and know how to be okay with having some negative thoughts sometimes and how to deal with that. So this is a great one. What you resist persists. And this one must be true because it fucking rhymes. I literally believe this whole belief came into the collective consciousness and resonated with loads of people because it fucking rhymes. It's the only reason. There's no other thought behind it. It's just because it rhymes and it sounds good. People are like, yeah, it rhymes. It must be true. That's a criteria for being a divine law of reality. It rhymes. I've lived this to be completely and utterly bullshit. Complete bullshit. Completely false. I've lived it to be false. Thank God I did, and thank God that so other many people have. Because if we didn't, nobody resisted and fought back against the plans of evil, we would be living in a very, very different world right now. And essentially, a lot of what the problem with the New Age is that it's very superficial and it just lacks depth. It's all fluffy nonsense, appealing to the ego. So here's a brilliant example. Now, I'm just going to give you a very quick history lesson. Go back to the mid to late 1800s. You may or may not know that there was a push for mandatory vaccines. Massive, massive push. And loads of people fought back and said, no, I don't want your damn vaccine. But what's fascinating is that even way back then, without the internet, without cars, without phones, without all of this incredible technology we have that makes communication and transportation easier, there was all of these groups, all of these resistant movements that started in the UK to resist this vaccine mandate. And eventually they all come together under a banner called the National Anti-Vaccination League. And you can look this up online and do a bit of research into this. Very interesting. And eventually the end result was a law was passed that gave people the choice to have the jab. Now, we essentially experienced that, but in super quick motion, like sped up a million times in the COVID madness. In about 2 to 3 years, we experienced the same thing that our ancestors experienced in the UK, but that their fight was over decades and everything was moving slower. But you can see, even back then, there was memes. People were creating memes, and if you're just on the audio, there's a meme here that's saying, "Do not vaccinate," and it's got a picture of a skull. It's got a skeleton, and it's behind a snake that's got the word vaccination on it that's chasing after a woman who's running away with her child. This was obviously all hand drawn and distributed in hand, and it's just amazing what we did even back then. And yeah, their fight was decades. Eventually, they won. And here's another more recent example. Not many people know about this, but during the height of the COVID madness, there was a push. A lot of people know about the no jab, no job policy push that started with the care workers. There wasn't enough of a resistance put up from the care workers, so the government got away with it. It became mandatory. Anybody who wasn't jabbed wasn't able to be a care worker. We're talking about the COVID jabs, obviously. Then they came for the NHS. And it was at that point enough people fought back. You had the NHS 100K movement started. You had Steve James, this doctor went viral, questioning Sajid Javid on Sky News about the jab. You had legal action being taken. You had these massive protests, and outside Downing Street, there's a picture here of all the doctors, the nurses, NHS workers throwing down their garments outside Downing Street in protest, all saying, we're not taking this damn jab. No way. We will lose our job rather than get this jab. And it's an incredible line in the sand, defining moment of this country in our fight back against evil. That ended the no jab, no jab. no jab, no job policy. Right there and then. And if that had not have happened, if not all of these amazing people stood up and fought for what they believed in, resisted the plans of evil, that policy may very well have gone to the NHS. And once the NHS submitted, then it could have moved to like the police or the fire service and then all of the public service. And then it could have just been a thing for society, for society that you must have a jab to work. That's very much, that was definitely a possible trajectory of how this all could have played out. But thankfully, enough people pulled their finger out and said no. And that's a very recent example of how we can fight back against the plans of evil. Now, again, credit where credit's due for the New Age movement. Some things are good. There's a very strong focus on embodiment practices. Yoga is definitely the most common, then meditation, probably shortly after that. It's so awesome to see that becoming a popular thing and is a very cool thing for people to be doing. I think everybody would benefit from a mind body embodiment practice of some sort, whether it's yoga, whether it's meditation or qigong or tai chi or whatever it is. And we do actually appear to be entering a new age of sorts. Old belief systems are crumbling down. Like I mentioned earlier, religion is in massive decline, but in many other parts of our world, the old way of doing things is falling apart, and there does seem to be a parallel society being built in real time, which is really, really exciting. And it's great to be a part of it. And people should be listening to their heart more and following their path of the heart. This is something that's often spoken about in the New Age and something that I found to be an amazing philosophy of life to live by, that you want to follow your path of the heart. Find that calling, that vocation, that job that you really enjoy doing, that makes money and it helps people. You find that, you're absolutely golden. That's going to be your path of the heart, whatever that is for you. It'll be different for everybody. And now here's something, perhaps my favorite part of the New Age, and that is spiritual eclecticism, a fancy way of saying the cherry-picked way, which is a massive part of the philosophy of my book, is that why limit yourself to just one spiritual belief system and say that's the only way to go about the spiritual path? Why not pick the best from the best of all of the spiritual belief systems? Find everything that's the best from Christianity or Islam or whatever, and then all of the countless other spiritual books that have been written over the ages, and just go deep into that, find what works, and leave the rest. Because that's the problem with religion, is just like you have to, it's all of this, whether it's good, bad, whatever, you have to. So I think that's an amazing, amazing part of the world that we live in right now. We have access to the world's information, all of the different cultures and teachers and gurus all around the world. So much of it's available online, or you can even purchase books online and you can read it in person. It's just, we have such an incredible access to information. And it's more of a case of just finding the best information that you can. And another awesome part of the New Age is a good understanding of energy, vibration, and frequency. It's just a sort of given now, but the West is mainly catching up to what the East has known for centuries, and maybe we did know this and we lost it, but whatever, is that basically we are more than just a physical body. We are more than just what we can see with our eyes. In fact, we see like 1% of everything. Most people know that fact. If you don't, there you go. Our eyes literally see 1% of the electromagnetic spectrum. There's 99% of stuff all around us that we don't actually see. And that ties into the fact that there's a lot of our own human body that we don't actually see in terms of our aura and our energy, and how different places or people or foods affect our aura. If we can see all of that, it'd be a totally different world. We'll get into that a little bit later. And touching on it just briefly here is extrasensory abilities like reality creation. Now, reality creation is mentioned all the time in this sphere. However, what's not often spoken about is how it is kind of like an extrasensory ability. It's kind of like a psychic power. It's an ability that is beyond our normal five senses, and that's how our mind can shape and change reality. Fascinating, and I'm going to cover that in depth as we get into the end of the presentation and I cover the psychic part. But for now, let's get into possibly the most important part of the spiritual path. And that's why in my book, chapter 3, once we've gotten over the problems and the good parts of religion and the New Age, the first thing is it's still cool to connect to God. I want to hammer that in deeply because I don't think it's even possible to have a functioning society without God above it, but also to have a fulfilled human experience without God involved in some way, shape, or form. So, what is God? Well, I believe God is paradoxically everything, but also within us, and we can also get closer to God. Now, there's a lot just in that sentence. You could sit down, meditate on that, contemplate on that, and unpack all of that for quite some time. But I'll leave you with that. You can think about that. I don't believe as God as some man up in the sky. I don't believe God is separate from us. God is everything. And I believe it was Philip Dick that put me onto the idea of, well, the first time I ever heard that the physical universe is like the body of God. I really like that. I thought that's really, really cool. But then it was Paul Brunton who was the man who introduced me to how I refer to God in my terminology. Paul Brunton is a very, very awesome guy. Some fascinating spiritual books. Definitely check him out. So he defines God as it. It's probably the only time I'll ever advocate gender neutrality in our language is referring to God because I think God is masculine, it is feminine, it's everything, but it's not a man or a woman as we define it. It's not just purely a masculine energy or just purely a feminine energy. It's not a man or a woman or male or female. It is everything. It just is. It is. So it's the so whenever I talk to God now in my language, I just refer to it. And Paul Brunton put me onto that, and it works for me. You see what I did there? So the thing is, define God how you like. It's mainly the concept of it that's most important, that there is this being, this entity, this energy that is incredibly wise and powerful and patient and above all of this reality and human society and us mere individual beings. I do believe for a functioning society, we need God above it. It's this overriding referee, this overriding reference point. Everything makes more sense when God is above our society. I couldn't imagine a society that doesn't have God there in some way, shape, or form. How do we connect to God? Well, prayer is definitely the best way to connect to God. There's no such thing as praying too much. And I believe, you can pray how you like. Some people might believe that there's a very strict and specific way that you pray. I don't think so. I think just opening up, like having a conversation you would with a very wise friend, just speaking like that, quite casual, but often once you get into a bit of a fly, a bit of a flow, and a bit of a vibe. I just tried to say flow and vibe at the same time there. Flybe, that's a new word. Once you get into that, it can be quite sincere and quite deep and channel some amazing energies. But you can pray for protection, you can pray for guidance, you can pray for love, but you can also pray when things are going well and just be grateful for what you have and pray for gratitude and appreciation. You can never be too grateful, so why not take some time to thank God for everything that you have right now? Prayer is a wonderful, amazing modality, and I believe that everybody should have some form of prayer in their life. And now, faith is a very important aspect of a connection to God. Do you trust God? Do you trust this reality? Do you believe it has your best interest at heart? If not, well, why not? Faith is an integral part of the spiritual journey, and it's tested. You got faith based on experience. It's a bit better than blind faith, but faith in God, in its wisdom, in the wisdom of its plan, is an integral part. And it will be tested in a variety of different means, and it can be strengthened, much like a muscle. You just need to use it, expand it, practice faith. And grace is a wonderful, mysterious aspect of how God enters our life. And again, Paul Brunton has an entire book that's been dedicated to this. It's actually extracts from his notebooks, and it's just all these wonderful little gems about grace. Definitely check that book out. I really, really enjoyed that book, Paul Brunton's book on grace. And funny enough, it appeared into my life, and it felt like divine grace when it arrived. Brilliant book. And grace is kind of like it's kind of like a cat. You can't force grace into your life. It chooses when it wants to be in your life. It's mysterious, but it's powerful and it's subtle, but it can also be just wham blam in your face. But there's so much to it. I really like this concept. Definitely check out the book by Paul Brunton to get into what grace is and how it can manifest in your life. And this is something I'm really, really big on. Something that I've lived through is having your own personal connection to God. And much like a relationship with a person, my connection with God has changed and grown and developed over time. And that's how it's worked for me. And this is something that I believe Christianity misses out on a huge, huge way is it always seems to need to have a priest or a church in between you and God. You can't just have your own personal dialogue and connection because where's the control in that? Huh? How are these mechanisms and institutions going to be able to control your mind and your soul if you don't need them to connect to God, right? That's basically everything that they're built upon is being the intermediary layer between you and God, when I don't believe that's necessary at all. We can all have our own personal connection to God. Now we're going to get into the framework. Essentially, this is the spiritual foundation upon which everything else is built upon. And that's why it's the second thing in the presentation. I guess it's the second most important thing on the spiritual path because this is what I see is being lost, especially people who are atheist or in the new age and haven't, got a sincere framework to live by. When you start to remove this framework, things get really messy. And essentially, the way I've written this framework is it's come from experience. I've lived a lot of this to be true, and I think this is the best ways that we can live to have a harmonious society in the long term. But a lot of what Christianity is based upon, for example, is fear. It's do as I say or else. If you don't follow these guidelines to life, you're going to burn in hell forever and it's going to really suck. That, as I mentioned before, probably works for lesser evolved beings, but more evolved beings, I think, benefit way more from do this and you will have an amazing life. Everybody will benefit. Everyone you know and love and care about will have a better life because you follow this framework. And it's quite simple. But at the very top, the most important is integrity. Everybody knows in their hearts when they're doing something that they shouldn't be doing, but they think they can get away with it because they think nobody's looking. Well, everything is seen. Nothing goes amiss here. It's all recorded in the divine framework of life, and God sees all. So there is never truly a moment on this world where you are able to get away with anything. You might be able to trick the people around you at the moment, but eventually it will come back to haunt you if you are a person of conscience and you are a good person. So why not just live as best you can with integrity? You will see benefit from that. And also, if you want to be more of an influential person in this world and be trusted with power, then God needs to know that it can trust you. And to do that, you will be given little tests of integrity. And when you start to pass those, you'll move up the divine hierarchy and start to be given more power. Every step of the way, you'll be tested on your integrity. The more integrity you have, the more power you get. And benevolence, just a fancy way of saying kindness. And I think that's just living from your heart and being as best of a person you can be to your fellow humans. Kindness is different from being nice because sometimes benevolence means tough love, means being firm. Compassion is a higher form of love in many ways, or at least the best thing that you can do at the time to help somebody with what they're dealing with. Because empathy, although it has its place, I often think that compassion is above empathy because if you're just in empathy, okay, maybe that person just wants to vent, but if you're coming down to how they feel rather than staying where you are above what they feel and just being firm in your frame and saying or feeling or acting in a way that can lift that person out of where they are, I believe that's a higher form of kindness. And it's definitely not the same as just being too nice because then you can just get taken advantage of. So benevolence and then honor. I mean, if we just had a society that values honor again, it was way more of a thing in the past. People used to care a lot more about their reputation and their bloodline and their last name and all of this. And I think there's something to that. Now, it floats around that you shouldn't care what other people think about you. And I mean, everybody cares what people think about them to some degree. It's just being yourself and owning who you are, but then also not abusing that belief and just being a fucking dickhead to everybody, like, and it's not in a positive way. I actually think sometimes it can be benevolent to be a dickhead when it's done with compassion for the right reasons. But it's all about your intention, where you're coming from. You can never fake intention. That's always seen. So to care a bit more about our honor and our reputation, I think would be a good thing for our society, and people will act in a better way when they want to be closer to an honorable way of living. Now, levity and humility are like the spices of the spiritual framework. You don't want to have too much of them, but you definitely need a bit of them. You need a bit of levity and you need a bit of humility. If you don't have any levity, it gets very dull and boring, and life is just grey, black, white, and everything is dull. You just need a bit of levity in amongst it all, and be able to not take yourself too seriously and be able to laugh at yourself, because God certainly has a sense of humor. And sometimes it does just feel like there's this divine comedy playing out, and you're a part of this TV show, reality TV show for the hyperdimensionals, you know. So you just got to laugh at yourself sometimes, because we are all still these imperfect human beings living out our lives, and a bit of humility just to know that sometimes you're wrong, sometimes the other person you're speaking to is right. And what's so common, you know, is when you're in a heated argument, you're never gonna. It's very, very rare for the person to be at a level of consciousness where they could admit that they were wrong in that moment, because it hurts the ego, and not very many people are able to transcend their ego in that moment. But then later on, if they are a wise being, they might be sitting down, contemplating, thinking about what that person said, and think, actually, maybe they're right. They may never tell you that, but that takes humility to be able to get to that point and understand that you might be wrong. If you never have any humility, it can be very, very, very dangerous, and you can end up going down a path that will cause you serious harm, because you just weren't able to learn from other people's mistakes and also recognize that you might not know everything right now. And service. So this is something I live day to day in my life. And I've gotten to a place now where I can very thankfully say that my work is aligned with my heart, is aligned with my passion, is aligned with my service. I've found what lights me up on the inside, what helps people, and I can make some money from it. I'm not balling. Maybe one day I will be rich, but right now I'm making enough money to survive and get by, and I'm very grateful for that. And I found ways to do that with all of the skills that I've built up over the years. There's in alignment with my heart, but it took me a long time to get here. I'm not saying it has to take everybody this long, but this is how it's worked for me, and I am a living embodiment. I literally wake up and work on projects that align with my heart, that help people, that I really enjoy all day, every day. And as you can see, I am home right now. I could work wherever I want. I can go to the library, coffee shop, or the other side of the world, bring my laptop and work wherever I want, and do stuff that really helps people and changes lives. And it's so amazing. Deep fulfillment, meaning, and purpose comes from finding whatever that is, whatever that is. Maybe you've got a few things, or maybe it's just one thing that you're amazingly good at, but finding that service, dedicating it to humanity, to God, is an important part of the framework of life. And just to finish up here, you can never be too grateful. Why not just sit down and think of 100 things you're grateful for right now? Once you get started, it's really easy. If you can't do 100, just do 10. If you can't do 10, just do one. I remember just even saying to this guy once, can you think of anything you're grateful for? And just to enter into that state of mind to think about things that could be grateful for was actually quite a revelation for him. So you can never be too grateful. And it's always important just to take stock of where you are. There's that great quote that's like, it's important to pull out the weeds of the garden of your mind and life, but every now and then you got to sit down and water the flowers, right? So that's gratitude, it's watering the flowers in your garden of your mind and of your life. And here's just a little symbolic picture of integrity. You're in the middle of nowhere, you see some rubbish on the ground in nature, and you pick it up. Nobody sees you do it. God obviously sees, but nobody sees. I mean, some people might record it and put it on social media. That's the era we're in, but ultimately, this is what integrity is. It's doing good when nobody's looking, doing the right thing when no one else can see it. You're not getting that ego gratification in the moment. You're just doing it because it's the heart-based thing to do. It's the right thing to do. More people living from integrity, we have a better world. And basically, we are being tested all the time. I would say this reality is a lesson generating machine. I've seen this once in almost incomprehensible ways to describe to you now on an Amanita Muscaria trip, but I've seen how this plays out. And for every single second of every single day, we're basically pulling in the lessons that we need. And sometimes we can get stuck on the same lesson and it keeps coming back to us over and over again, different kind of variations. But if you're making progress, you'll get different lessons and so on. But I believe ultimately we're here for spiritual evolution. So we're going to keep getting the lessons we need to evolve our soul, good, bad, and ugly, whatever comes our way. And God needs good people with power. However, they have to be of the right character and prove themselves worthy to be in a position of power. Otherwise, how can God trust you with power? If it can't trust you with where you're at right now, how will you be able to handle more? And this is essentially how we're winning this fight, winning this war of the mind, which is ultimately a spiritual war, and that's one mind at a time. And you can see here, it just takes one person to ignite all of the other minds. One fire, one burning fire of the soul could ignite all of the other souls and be this trailblazer. And we have this ripple domino effect, one mind at a time. Now we're getting on to something a lot of the new age just could never even dare look at because it's not just fluffy and feel good. Shadow work, so crucial in this spiritual game we're in. We need to be able to identify our triggers and our wounds and know when what we're saying, thinking, feeling, and acting is coming from either our wounds or our conditioning, or someone is actually genuinely toxic. They're not triggering us. We're responding to toxic behavior. All of this comes into play with shadow work, and a massive part of it is, let's be real, it's pretty traumatic being a human on this planet at this time. Even the most mollycoddled person in the world has childhood trauma. This is just a reality of life as a human right now, and maybe there are reasons for that. However, all we can do is work on our childhood trauma that we have. And there is obviously trauma throughout life as well, just to add on to it. But yeah, childhood trauma is a very, very good place to start. And you can get lost in this, but I think it's a very important exercise to sort of go back over your childhood and think about how the way your parents acted may have impacted you and how that, you can get stuck in your subconscious and create a belief about the world. And then if you don't work on that belief, then you will play that out for the rest of your lives. I mean, it's commonly spoken about how, like, the first 6 to 7 years of our life, our mind and our brain is just so open that we get programmed at this point. And if you don't do anything after that, when you're an adult, you will live out those subconscious programs for the rest of your life. And that's why people will just self-sabotage, or things will go wrong and they just don't know what's going on here. And they're playing out these subconscious patterns that have been picked up from childhood. And it's a very deep and complex subject, but everybody needs to work on their childhood trauma. To do that, self-psychological evaluation is incredibly important. And this is a lot of journaling and contemplating and just going over stuff. And I think a good thing to do, because you can get lost in this, you don't want to go too far with it for too long, but you definitely want to go deep. Definitely, you want to really engage in this for some time, and just look at think about what your parents' main core beliefs might be about the world and things they kept on saying to you, especially maybe about the opposite sex or about money or about this world, and how that might have imprinted onto you and how that can reflect in how you interact with the opposite sex or with money or with this world. Very, very useful, important stuff to do. And then you can get into how, you can understand your triggers and understanding the origins of thoughts. This is where meditation is absolutely crucial, and self-awareness, self-understanding, when you can start to really get into where thoughts may come from. And there's a lot of different places, they may all sound the same in your head, but there's many, many different places a thought can come from, whether it's coming from a place of subconscious wounding, whether it's coming from your higher self or your intuition or even your gut instincts and so on. External thought forms, we'll cover that shortly. But these are all different places, and there are more where thoughts can come from. So we need to have the self-awareness and self-knowledge to be able to understand where thoughts are coming from, to be able to differentiate if we're dealing with somebody who is triggering us or they are acting in a toxic manner. And when we get into the nitty-gritty of shadow work, we can integrate the darkness within, understanding we do have the dark and the light within us, and it's being able to get the balance, finding healthy expressions for our darkness, being able to transmute that energy things like anger can actually be very, very useful when used in the right way. And there is such a thing as righteous anger. And then there's the parts of our sexuality. We are still these primal animalistic beings on one level. So we need to find the healthy ways to express that. Because if we don't, it can end up getting perverted and we get into all sorts of weird and nasty situations. And tied in with that is clearing up your own old wounds. Now, embodiment practices are really, really helpful in this regard. A consistent yoga practice can help you clear your old wounds because of how the body stores trauma. And I have a nice slide coming up about that. But also, just to mention this isn't that common, but it is a possibility, and it does happen sometimes, is what I like to call the shadow work trap, where it's basically people get stuck on this part of spirituality and they're always looking for their next trauma, trying to find the next thing that's wrong with them. And I mean, if you look hard enough, you're probably going to find all of these extra things and problems and so on, and you just get caught in this loop, and it's always about your trauma, blah, blah, blah. It's so important to do the shadow work, but it's also important to know when you need to move on, at least for now, and you can come back at a different point in the years to come. But just try not to get stuck there, because I've seen it and it seems like a pretty bad place to be stuck, always trying to find the latest trauma. And so the body stores trauma. Now, this is important to mention because you might have heard about this, and I have anecdotally over my travels, especially, is there'll be somebody who physically they're doing everything right, they're eating right, they're working out, but then suddenly they just get seriously ill or they just drop dead or something terrible happens to them with their body. And I believe that's in large part because the body stores trauma. So if that happens for long enough over time, like if a emotion gets suppressed or if a limiting belief is allowed free reign in your mind for too long and it can clog the energetic pathways of the body, then that can cause disease. That can even be fatal. It's incredibly important to be aware of this. It can be that serious that this can actually kill people. Trauma can kill you is a powerful line. So then it's working on the body, getting in touch with the body, embodiment practices, and that's why things like yoga or qigong or meditation or whatever can really, really help you get into your body and clear the old wounds, get the energy moving again and clear the trauma, and could, well, cure or prevent disease. Now, this is something that's cool. I really like this image. And this is Defense Against the Dark Arts. And essentially, we're going to get into a bit about how to navigate evil. And I obviously, as well, this is also a chapter in my book, and I get into this on a deeper level. But this is something that came up recently, and I'm hoping that by bringing enough awareness to it, they won't be able to pull this trick off again very effectively. So essentially, our enemies know about the power we have to speak and think things into existence. So they write with a very confident tone when they're trying to get their agenda across. So here's an article, a recent article that was about the proposed water fluoridation scheme in the northeast of England. And as I mentioned before, we've stopped the rollout of fluoride many, many times. But with this article, they were very clever. They used their psychological trickery and they wrote this article in a confident way as if this is going to happen. There's nothing you can do about it. These 1.6 million people in the Northeast are going to get fluoride added to their water supply. It's already happened. It's a given. And the thing is, what I saw is so many in the truther movement, they see this, they get scared, they react, they share without thinking, and they're actually helping the enemy's agenda to come into fruition. It's kind of frustrating when you see our own team members helping the other side unknowingly, unwittingly. But if enough people get aware of how the evil operates and how they know about our own power and how they know how to use our own power against us, hopefully they'll be less successful the next time they try and pull this off. This was so common in the COVID era. I saw this time and time again. I'd see how they'd seed and bubble a narrative and see how it was going, and then people would get scared, share, react, scared, react, share, or react, scared, share. However that goes down. I saw it over and over again. So I just want to bring it up because it was very powerful. Or I have this article, and the Telegraph had a similar one, but they'll have a headline that says the agenda is going to happen. Our first few lines will be like, this is going to happen, and then it will have the rest of the article to try and show that it's balanced. But the key part, that's why it's right at the very top, was getting people to accept in their minds that this is going to happen and that there's nothing that you can do about it, regardless of the fact that shortly after these articles came out, there was the public consultation, which is them asking for our permission if they can get away with fluoridating the water supply in the northeast of England. Funnily enough, none of the mainstream media outlets have even mentioned the water fluoridation consultation. It's been literally the Fluoride Free Alliance and a few others, but nobody else in the same level that have mentioned that there is a consultation and shown you that there are steps that we can take to fight back. We don't have to just accept this. It's not a given that it's happening, but this is how they operate. It's one of their prized possessions, prized jewels, prized weapons is using our own power against us. Now, this is worth mentioning. You might have experienced this. Basically, The Matrix is a documentary, and anybody who's still asleep, still plugged in, can be taken over by the Matrix itself in the form of the agents, much like in the film. And let me give you a little story of how this played out. This has played out a few times, but this story just highlights it perfectly. So I'm in North Wales, and I'm staying at this place. It's a nice property. It's situated right near the coast, and you just see the mountains everywhere, and it's very nice. I start getting to know the group of people that are in the area, and we get on okay. I don't get into anything too deep straight away. And over the weeks, we hang out a bit. And then there's this one day that we finally get onto something related to COVID. And much to my amazement and my surprise, everybody, bar one, actually agreed with what I was saying about the vaccine mandates, how that's all bullshit, and the mask and so on. But this one guy, he was quite old. He switched on me, complete switch. Till that point, he's been lovely, kind, friendly. Switched, just like how in the film The Matrix, people just get taken over and now they are an agent of the Matrix. This guy was just like that in real time. And he was so aggressive and very, you could see how uncomfortable he was that I was saying these things. He was just, it caused him deep pain that I was talking against the narrative. Obviously, because he's been deep in it, he's been jabbed and so on. And then we had a bit of a heated debate, and our relationship was never really the same since. But that was a very good example, and I'm sure many of you listening have had something play out just like that. And this is why I've basically given up trying to wake other people up. It's a pointless exercise because they're still plugged in. And essentially, you're dealing with the Matrix. These people get taken over. They don't know what they're doing. They're just literally reacting in the moment and then regurgitating what they've been programmed to say. That's what can happen. So just to be aware of that and to not hate these people, just be aware of that's where they're at. And this ties in because it is almost pointless trying to wake someone up. And I think there is good reason for that. One, at first, because it's quite traumatic. It's pretty hard. And people have already had enough fucking trauma in their lives. They don't want to start thinking about how they might have been lied to about everything and how there is this great elite evil with a plan against them that's tough and not very pleasant to think about. So it's almost pointless trying to wake someone up for that. But also, not only that, but from what I found is when you get far enough, when you get deep enough, this path, this journey is absolutely fucking incredible. It can lead to the most amazing ways of living and the most incredible perspectives. And I think you actually have to earn that. You've got to be ready and deserving to go deep on this path and reap all of the benefits. So yeah, dual reasons there. Now, this is important to mention. This is an esoteric concept. We're getting into the occult a bit now. We're getting pretty high level. But thought forms are a part of life, and generally they're most often just spoken about in a negative sense. But essentially, we can create thought forms, and there are such a thing as collective thought forms. When you continually think about something, that your thoughts have energy, have power. And over time, if you think the same thing over and over again, what starts to happen is you kind of create this like entity, this being that then wants to continue its existence and will plug into your mind and cause you to think thoughts that keep it alive by siphoning the energy that you are putting out there. I know we're getting pretty occult right now, but this is what I'm talking about, how we only see a tiny fraction of everything going on here. And this is part of life, but it doesn't always have to be negative. You can do the same in a positive sense and continually feed positive thought forms that are going to want to then, after a while, they get a life of their own and want to continue their existence. And just out of habit, you're thinking in a better positive sense because this being, this cloud of energy is wanting to continue its existence by feeding off of the positive thoughts that you are putting out there. Very interesting concept. Another way to look at it, if you were to think of fire and get into that deeply, feel fire and heat and warmth, visualize it, and you did that enough, and then you thought about a house and you started to think of that on fire, putting that energy that you've just generated here onto that house, you increase the probability of a fire happening there. And depending on how much energy and power you've put into it, will depend on how much of the probability you increase. It might even be a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent. But that's how it works. And that's great power. So use it wisely. And to be fair, to be able to really influence things in that sense, it requires a very, very high power level. And if you're on the side of the good guys, you can bet your ass you will be tested to oblivion before you can even get close to being able to do something that powerful. But that's how it works. And there are such a thing as collective thought forms. I think COVID was a combination of different things, but one aspect of the agenda was actually utilizing the power of collective thought forms. And fear was a massive driver of that. Of course, fear is a very powerful energy. So if you can get millions and millions of people in a very powerful state of fear and then control what they think about a certain possibility of life, then people can start to create in real time this collective dark thought form. So that's a negative example of how this collective thought form can play out. The opposite can be true, but that's an interesting concept to think about. So an important part of the occult side of things, and definitely something if you're interested in to do a bit more research about. Now, this is how, or this is something that I believe is so important to bring up because I actually think on the hierarchy of life, somebody who's awake but black pilled is only just above a normie who's completely asleep. At least sometimes normies can have a lovely vibe and they're actually quite pleasant to be around. Somebody who's a black pilled truther is often just toxic and negative and so boring to be around, no fun. It's so disempowering. They believe that there's absolutely nothing that we can do to stop the evil agenda. They've already won and they basically give up. And it's like, that's exactly where our enemies want people to be. They want to be in this disempowered, low vibe state, not taking any action to fight back, believing that they've already won. It's a terrible, terrible place to be. And I found, well, to balance out, because in fairness, you can get lost in all of the negativity. You can get lost in all of the evil that's happening here and continually looking at all of the bad things that are happening to our society and to our people. So if that's what you're looking at and you're only looking at the political level, then yeah, things can look seriously dark and we're fucked. But if you have a spiritual foundation to balance things out, that's how you dodge the black pill. And I think every sincere truther that's going to go far enough on their path needs to have a spiritual foundation to balance out the negativity. And that's how you get the strong positivity in your worldview, in your life, in your mind, in your reality, is the spirituality to balance things out. That's how you dodge the black pill. And that's why just yet another reason why I'm so hot on the spiritual path. Now, sex and drugs. When I put this slide up in Buxton, actually a couple people were like, yeah, you need to put rock and roll as well at the bottom there. But I thought when I was making this presentation, I thought I'll throw in this slide because we're quite deep in and this will wake people up in case they're getting a bit tired of listening to me talk. Actually, by that point, people are still very, very engaged. And so was I. I really loved it. But here we go. Sex and drugs. Now, here's an interesting graph because it might flip on its head what some of you believe about drugs. Because, okay, undoubtedly, there are some drugs that if you get involved with them, they will ruin your life. It will be seriously harmful to you and everybody else around you. And there's basically nothing positive that comes from them. But drugs are just mind altering chemicals. So if we look at the hierarchy of what drugs are actually more damaging than others, funnily enough, the most normalized, the most readily available, the most legalized, the one you could go anywhere in the world, or well, I say anywhere in the, let's just stick to the UK. Some places have been quite wise and banned it. Anywhere in the UK, you're not too far away from alcohol. You can find it anywhere you like. And it's right at the very top as the most damaging to others and in total to others and to yourself. It's the most damaging drug of them all, but it's the most normalized. And Graham Hancock is very famously quoted for saying, alcohol is the most boring of drugs. And as somebody who's experimented with quite a lot of drugs, not everything on this list, but quite a lot of them, I would agree. It is. It can be fun in a social environment, in a little bit in moderation, even occasionally. Back in the day, I had a lot of fun getting pretty wasted, but then the hangover's not worth it. It's really toxic, it's poisonous, and the hangovers get pretty boring. At least they did for me. And once I started getting deep into my spiritual path, I went 6 years without a single drop of alcohol. And some people are like, yeah, I stopped drinking, but then they'll have a beer here and there. Not me. I didn't touch the stuff at all for 6 years. And that was because of how it interfered with my spiritual progression. And I went really far with it. And I'm really glad I did. And I tell you what, once I got used to playing pool and being sociable and being comfortable enough with my body to be able to dance sober, I didn't need alcohol. There's a bit of a story of how I got back into it. And then I got become a digital nomad like completely. And I decided to party pretty hard for a while and I had some fun with it. But then I went too far and got really drunk once and had this meaty hangover for 3 days. And that was actually this year. And I was like, fuck this, man. And I've barely had a drink since then again. So I don't really miss it. Occasionally, it's nice to have the odd cider or whatever. But that's about all I have to say about alcohol, really. I honestly don't rate it. But the funny thing is, at the bottom, the least harmful, number one least harmful drug in the world, according to this study done in Britain, is mushrooms. Right at the bottom there. There is no harm to others, judging by this graph. You can't see any harm to others, to community, economic, crime, family. Nobody gets harmed when you take some mushrooms, and I'd fucking agree. All that happens is you have a good time. You might laugh a lot. You can take it at a party, have a lot of fun. That's only just scratching the surface of what you can do with mushrooms. If you want to take it to the next level, you want to do a mushroom ceremony and go deep and clear wounds and trauma, or just have revelations and experiences that are going to change your entire life and perspective on this world. Right at the bottom there. And honestly, if I have a good mushroom experience, the next day I feel like I've had an upgrade. I feel like my brain's more connected and it's a massively positive thing. Then just above that is LSD. And the same thing, I'd say everything that I've just said about mushrooms to LSD, although it can be a bit more intense, there's a little bit more possibilities for things to go wrong with LSD, I would say, from what I've seen, especially from what I've seen with other people. I mean, it's very rare I've actually seen someone have a bad trip on LSD, but I have seen it. I've never seen anyone have a bad trip on mushrooms, although it is possible. But yeah, from my experience, LSD is just a bit more intense and needs a bit more of a mind to be able to handle it properly. Then just above that is ecstasy, which is also MDMA, and I think this drug is absolutely incredible, but it's got to be used in the right way. You can definitely abuse it, but again, it's right there. It's the third least most dangerous and harmful drug. There are studies of PTSD being treated with it. I will go into it a little bit more, but here we go. Here is the king mushroom, if you like, the Amanita muscaria. It's so powerful. It's so life changing that the government hasn't even classified it as an illegal substance because they don't even want to do that because then people will be wondering why is it illegal, and then they might just try and take it. Instead, this interesting belief in the collective consciousness has been instilled that it's just toxic. I used to believe this too, and I actually think that if you don't dry it out, that is still true because during the process of drying it out, you convert the ibotonic acid into the psychedelic component, which is muskimel. So now I'm going to tell you the most powerful psychedelic experience I've ever had. This is on my website as a write-up, and there are 4 parts to my Amanita muscaria experiences where I experimented extensively throughout my time in New Zealand because they were just growing everywhere. So let me paint this picture for you. I'm in the South Island of New Zealand, right at the very north of the South Island, in a place called Golden Bay, which is just hippie central. And I was right in the middle of nowhere in this off-grid Hellpex. You just couldn't get more hippie-ish than where I was and what I was doing. Living with the nature, no electricity, had a solar panel, and that was about it. You know, living, cooking, breathing around the fire and building structures out of all these basic materials. One hell of an experience. So great. But one day, this German guy, actually the German guy I mentioned before, who was the gorilla vegan, good guy. I like this guy. But he's joking with me because these mushrooms were everywhere around the campsite. He's joking. He sort of nudges me on the shoulder and he's like, points to these mushrooms and they're the king psychedelic. I'm like, what? No, they're not, man. They're poisonous, which is what everybody thinks. Every time I mention the Amanita muscaria and I show people the picture and whatever, they're like, that's poisonous. And that's what I believed. And that's what they've cleverly done. So he's like, no, no, they're not. They're the king psychedelic. He'd never tried them himself, but he sparked my interest. So I think, fuck it. I get my phone, go to the solar panel, and sit there over the course of 2 to 3 days for 10 hours doing research on Irowiz about Amanita muscaria. And honestly, I couldn't believe my eyes because I get deep into my research and I'm like, oh my God, this guy's right. These are hugely psychedelic from what everybody's saying, and they're literally all over the place. So we collect a large amount of them, and you can see the pictures on my write up. We give them to the woman who owns the property, and she takes them to a house and dries them out because obviously, yeah, you got to dry them out. Pretty hard to do in the middle of nowhere. I did manage to do that though in the second trip over a fire, and it took like 8 to 10 hours. But anyway, so we give them to the woman. She comes back, and we do our ceremony. We took it very seriously. We had intention and incense and meditation and qigong and all of this. We took it very seriously. It was a sacred experience. I had about 12 grams. And when I say that, people are like, whoa, that's a lot because they relate it to psilocybin mushrooms. And if you had 12 grams of psilocybin, wow, I can only imagine what that would do to you. But 12 grams of Amanita is nowhere near as strong as 12 grams of psilocybin, but it's still a pretty decent dose. And the German guy and the French woman who also took them with me, I think they had 10 and 8 grams respectively. I didn't eat on that morning, and they did, and I believe that interfered with the digestion or whatever because before long, after eating, and the German guy threw up, and the French woman wasn't in a very good place either. So I realized that I'm okay, and I'm just like, all right, And I'd read online that people they go and lay down and they wake up and they're in some sort of trip. So I tried to do that. I tried to fall asleep, and I was like, nah, this ain't happening. I was restless and had quite a lot of energy, and I was like, oh yeah, these are all right though. I feel fine. I don't feel like I've just eaten a poisonous mushroom and I'm going to die. So I think, okay, let's go into the surrounding area and try and find some more for the next trip. So obviously I couldn't eat them straight away. They had to be dried out. So I was like, yeah, let's go take some more. But over the course of my 10 hours of research, I had came across what some of the shamans and the villagers would do back in the day is that because when you eat the Amanita muscaria, not all of the psychedelic component is actually completely absorbed by your body. In fact, most of it isn't. It's only a small percentage. What would happen is the shaman would eat these mushrooms and then he would piss, and the villagers would drink his piss and get fucking wasted and go on the journey with his piss. Sounds disgusting, and it kind of is, but it worked for them, and there we go. So there was no doubt in my mind that when it came to the point of me needing a piss, what I had to do. I had a bottle with me full of water. I tipped it all out. I pissed in the bottle. I drank it. It didn't taste that bad, but it was just weird. It was like still warm and a bit salty. And I'm like, I really shouldn't be drinking this. But I did. And I tell you what, it worked. It was kind of like doubling my dose. It felt like, and before long, I was thinking in pictures. My thinking went from just simple words to pictures and also happening very, very quickly. It was like flashing, and I would have these problems and I'd think about the solution like ding, 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 really, really fast in this bang, 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 bang. And I was like, I feel like I'm using more of my mind. So I have these revelations. I start storming back to the campsite to tell the guys what I just experienced and that I shrunk my piss, but it worked. I must have looked pretty mad. But I get back and I start telling them what I've done, and I must have been convincing enough because the German guy who had previously thrown up, he also drank his piss, but then he threw up again. So I imagine that wasn't very nice, throwing up your own piss. But anyway, I noticed that when I come back to the camp and being around people again, it significantly lowered the power of the trip. So I wanted to be on my own again. So I run off into the middle of the New Zealand bush again, and they follow me for a little bit. And I'm like, no, I want to be on my own. So they leave me to my own devices. Now, what started to happen was very, very strange. It was like being drunk but your mind is completely on point. So my body just wasn't responding to what my mind was saying. And I was trying to walk. I was trying to like force my body to walk, but this wasn't responding and staying in the same place. And my head was like moving forward. My body's just like, no. Then the last thing I remember that definitely happened is I tipped out my bag and there's like my phone and speakers in there and just threw it all on the floor. And I have no idea why I did that, but I did it. And then the next thing that happened, I don't know if it actually happened on some level or if it's some sort of dream or trip or what, but I just start running. And I'm running and I'm running and I'm running. I've no idea where I'm going, but I'm just going and going and going. And then I stop and suddenly I was like, this mad pain in my chest. I think that's weird. And I don't think, and I just think, fuck it, and to keep running and running and running. And this goes on a bit of a cycle until it gets to the point where the pain in my chest is so intense. I start to think about the fact that maybe I've fucked up here and I've actually taken poisonous mushrooms and I'm going to die because these are actually seriously toxic. And I start thinking that I'm delusional and I can't actually see what's happening. I think I'm back at the campsite. I just can't see it. And I'm not actually here in this weird field forest running around. And I start going to my friends like, guys, I fucked up. I've taken these poisonous mushrooms, tell my parents I love them. I'm gonna die. And for every sense of the word, I actually died. The moment I did, I mean, the pain was so intense, it went through my whole body. But the moment I died, it stopped. All the pain disappeared. I felt incredible. And I'm greeted by all these beings that you see on screen right now. And they were like a turquoise night sky, like that was their body, but they're all really happy and clapping and cheering for me, like, "Way, you made it! You made it to the next level of reality." And I'm like, "Holy fuck, okay." Just being blown away by that experience, but all right. Let's go with that. And so this happened for a short while, and then the next thing that happened was I had my life review, and you hear about those near-death experiences where people are like, "My life flashed before my eyes." Well, this did, and it started at first. I had all of the negative feelings, and actions I went through throughout this life, and I experienced them as pain throughout my body, and it was so so painful. And my friends could sit, they could hear me screaming in agony, but then the next thing that happened was all the positive thoughts, feelings, and emotions that had gone through throughout my life. I experienced that as like an orgasm, but your whole body, but it just kept on going and going and going. And my friends said they could hear my screaming going from like to oh as I transitioned from the one to the other. So something definitely happened. Anyway, that was incredible. Then the next thing that definitely happened, what that happened on this trip was that I was talking with this massive being that I guess was representative of God, and we're going through my life and planning my next life and all of this. And then the last thing I remember seeing is all of these universes all stacked up next to each other, representative balls of light just going off into infinity. And after I saw that, I think to myself, all right, now it's time to start my new life in this next level of reality. And as soon as I had that thought, boom, back in my body, no idea where I am. It's completely pitch black. I can't actually see in front of me at all. I'd lost my shirt and it was really cold. So all I think of doing is just sitting down and I start just trying to process what I just went through. But I was there for hours and it was lucky that I was wearing my Alibabas because that potentially proved life-saving because I like got in this ridiculous position and I managed to sort of put my head in my Alibabas a bit to circulate the hot air coming from my mouth on my body just to keep a little bit of warmth. I was so cold. But finally, when the sun did come up, I was shaking, like the onset of hypothermia. But luckily, I made it through the night and I realized I wasn't that far away from the campsite and I picked up all my stuff and quickly ran back and wrote down my experience. And like I said, you can find that write up on my website, traviscook.uk. And yeah, that was an incredible experience. By far the most profound psychedelic experience I've ever had. Now we're going to move on to MDMA briefly. I just want to touch on this because, like I said before, drugs get a very bad name, and I know why because they can be incredibly damaging to your life. But alcohol is completely normalized and is never really referred to as a drug, but it's a drug. But that's totally okay. But then you have MDMA. This is such an incredibly beautiful chemical when used in the right way. It can be abused. You can get addicted. I've been there, and MDMA addiction is just as bad as any other addiction, or some cases worse because it's a very powerful drug. And I'd never recommend anybody to abuse it. But if you use it occasionally, it can be an incredibly spiritual experience. It can be an uplifting experience. It can open you up to love and removing of inhibitions that we just don't have in many other ways. And now you can definitely get to these states, without having MDMA. And obviously, the goal of spiritual progression is to get to a harmonious baseline vibe that you just carry with you throughout your day. But imagine how hard it would be, for example, to get the visuals you'd have on like LSD or DMT with just the power of your mind. That's a very, very high level thing. So most people aren't there. So they're also not able to access these states of love and inhibition removal very easily. And that's what MDMA can do. And it can be a very, very powerful tool to bond people together. If anybody's listening to this and they've got a partner, if you want to get close to them, and I'm hoping you already are, but if you want to, see how that relationship can develop and grow in interesting ways, have an MDMA experience together and just see what that's like, and guarantee you'll love each other a bit more after that. You'll have some amazing rocking sex too. So I think MDMA, I often have joked about, if I was in charge of this world, how MDMA would be legal, and you'd have MDMA bars and it'd be a totally different experience to an alcohol bar. I promise you that. Promise you that. Bar of love. So here we get on to one of the most beautiful parts of being a human, and that's sex. Now, I'm going to assume most people listening to this show, they're in touch with their sexuality. They're all right. They're probably getting laid. I hope you are. Or they've been laid in the past. They know what sex is like, and they're okay with it. They're comfortable with it. But there'll be some people, and this was me for a time, who would have broken away from their sexuality. And it may not even been from religion, or it may have been from the New Age. The New Age, and partly part of that came from some of the religious beliefs about sex, especially Buddhism. It led me down a path where I broke away from my sexuality. Like, a brief history of my sexuality was I lost my virginity at 14, and I had a great time with sex and with plenty of women until I met, I guess, my first proper girlfriend. And she's an amazing woman. I hope she's okay. We haven't spoken in a very long time. Who knows what she's doing now? But that was probably the first time I actually really had sex with love, you know? And there's this time when we were having sex and I was looking in her eyes, and I never forget the way she looked at me and how I felt when she did whilst we were having sex. And it was a beautiful, beautiful thing. Unfortunately, I take the hit for this one. I screwed that relationship up. It's like one of my, probably the only real regret that I have in my life is screwing that up, because I take full responsibility of, yeah, it was me. Other relationships, we both sort of screwed it up, or it was mainly them, or whatever. But for this one, it was like, yeah, I really screwed that up. But anyway, after we split up, I had a one night stand with this woman I didn't really find attractive, didn't even really like to hang out with. But I was just quite drunk and thought, fuck it. I felt so disgusting the day after that it started me on a that was the day, the moment, but it started me off on a massive journey of me getting disconnected with myself sexually and thinking that sex is bad and dirty and wrong and blah blah blah. And then I started getting into some of the new agey Buddhisty stuff as well, like the mix in with the Buddhist stuff. And there's documentaries on YouTube that talk about how somehow a man having an orgasm is actually a bad thing for him, and it just drains him and whatever. And this coupled in with a few other teachings that I found online and culminated in me breaking away from my own sexuality in a very big and destructive way. And it took me a long time to get back. And I tell you what, I missed out on a lot of sex with a lot of beautiful women. And I'm not just stroking my ego here. I tell you, that's the truth, especially during my time in Australia. There's a lot of beautiful women in Australia. Let me tell you that. A lot of beautiful, horny women. Let's just leave it at that. And the only thing that actually finally brought me back to sexuality was just having sex. Now, I mention this because, again, like with the shadow work trap, most people don't get caught there, but some people might. And me bringing this up might help certain people. A lot of what I talk about is parts of it are specifically geared towards people that might be experiencing the same problems that I have overcome. So that might resonate with some of you. Hopefully, most of you are having good sex and enjoying it. But I realized that sex done properly can actually be a fucking huge boost to your vibe and your energy. And there have been sometimes like just afterwards you just feel like the fucking man, and you got so much energy and the testosterone is just flowing. You feel like you take over the world when you have really good sex. And that's never really spoken about. There's such a huge variety, and that's not even in getting into tantra, but you can have. I've realized this actually. You can have sex with love without being in love, and you can have the most incredible, rocking, passionate, horny sex, and that can actually be a very positive thing for everybody involved. The only issue I ever find really is when people are cheating on somebody who's being loyal to them, and that's probably almost, unless you get into the very weird fetish stuff, obviously pedophilia. That's pretty much all you can do wrong in the world of sex. So, and this is an outlet for the dark energy we have within us. That's quite a healthy way to express it in obviously consensual sexual relationships. You can express this dark animalistic nature we have with some rocking, passionate sex, and that is one way of, I guess, healthfully expressing this energy we have inside of us. And what a great way to do it. So I think sex is an amazing, incredible, beautiful thing, and I love talking about it. Funnily enough, I find myself talking about it with women quite a lot, and there's probably various reasons for that, but I love talking about sex, and that's why I got this image. Every image, nearly every image you're seeing here, I've created with AI, and I just find this is such a beautiful, beautiful image that symbolizes the divine union of the male and female, man, woman, masculine and feminine. Look at that. Right, so now for a bit of a switch up. We get in again into some esoteric concepts here, but what happens when we die? What do you think happens when we die? Do you believe in reincarnation? Or do you think it's the end? Now, after going deep onto this question, I figured that you may as well believe the most empowering belief possible about death because nobody for sure really knows. I mean, people have near death experiences and they seem to, they seem pretty confident on what happens, but let's just say basically nobody actually really knows. So why not believe the most empowering belief that you can? And I found that the Law of One books provide the most empowering belief about what might happen when we die. And there's a whole framework of reality. I'll get into it in a bit when we touch on the levels of this reality. But essentially, I believe that the soul goes on and there is reincarnation that happens. But once you reach the level of a human, you're pretty much here until you can evolve to the next level. And I think, this is a combination of multiple belief systems, really. I don't believe you just have one life here. I think there's far too much to learn in the human experience to only have one life on this planet or as a human. But then also, I don't think it's an eternal reincarnation forever as humans. I think once you've learned enough about being a human on this level of reality, you can transcend to the next level of reality. And as a whole criteria, a whole learning experience that comes from going from the third density to the fourth density in ways that are probably hard to really comprehend. But the Law of One books do a pretty good job of putting that into perspective. I think that's what can happen. And when we throw in reincarnation, it fills in a lot of the gaps of some of the reasons of why things are happening on this reality at the moment. It explains why there could be this idea of like very old souls, and I've seen 18, 19-year-olds that seem more spiritually wise than some 60, 70-year-olds, and I think that's because of the age of the soul. I think if you could have a soul that's had thousands and thousands of incarnations and then they just happen to be 18 at the moment when you meet them compared to someone who's only just had one or two lives as a human, they're not going to be the same person because although there is this forgetting that happens every time we reincarnate, I think some things are still kept. And with that, that's why I believe some people are naturally super gifted with certain things. Maybe in a previous life, this person mastered the piano and then they die and come back and they just have this natural gravitation, this natural talent for the piano. I think that's the next possible explanation, and it makes a lot of sense. Also, on a bit more of a morbid perspective, but does again give a potential reason of why reality is set up like this, is I think that before becoming a human, we go through the plant and animal kingdom and we, go through all of the learning experiences of what all that's about. But then you'll have like that transitory life, I suppose, where maybe you've had enough, you live a few lives as a pet dog or cat or a dolphin or whatever the most highest evolved animal is. And then you pass over to be a human, but you're still You've only just having your first experiences of being a human, and maybe that's why some people in like Africa, they have these very short lives, and a lot of them are dead before they're, even five or whatever. And I'm not saying that's how it should be. And hopefully, in the future of our civilization, we create a world where that's not the case for anybody, and everybody lives to a very long and old age. But maybe that's why things are the way they are right now in this reality. People are just having their first ever lives as a human. Maybe that's why they're so short and missing the full scope of what it really means to be a human. It provides a possible explanation. So maybe that's the case. But then, yeah, like I mentioned, you can keep going and evolve and transition to whatever the next density is. And now, let me just share with you a weird and wonderful synchronicity because this was really quite beautiful and touching what happened here. So this happened in the same place where in North Wales where I was. So in this place that I was living, there was only a central house that had the Wi-Fi. That had the Wi-Fi. It's a big house, and this property has also had people staying there and so on. So I'm in one of the rooms, and it's most of the time there's not people in it. Sometimes there is, but I was doing a live stream of the 30th episode of the Open One podcast, and the title is Death and Meditation. You can go check it out. And it's not very often I live stream. In fact, I very rarely ever live stream the show. It's always pre-recorded. But for some reason I felt like doing it for this show. And it's a 40-minute show, but for the first half an hour, I'm pretty much just talking about meditation. And on the final 10 minutes, I start to transition to death. And the moment I do, these three men come in, kind of dressed like chavs a bit, but they look like not to be messed with. But they come in and they're like, "Oh, we want to watch the footy." And I'm like, "Really?" Like, I'm in the middle of a live stream as this is happening. People are watching in real time. So really, like, do you mind? I'm trying to do a live stream. Like, no, we want to watch the footy. I'm like, fuck. Okay, so what do? I can't. I just keep going, and they sit down on the sofa and start watching the footy. So I start going into what I believe about death and how reincarnation and it's not the end. There's this whole journey, and as I'm going through it, they stay looking at me, and occasionally for a good minute or two, they're just actually watching me do my live stream, and I just managed to keep it going. It's a bit strange having these people watching me do my live stream, especially as it's just like, do they just think I'm a fucking madman? They don't really look like the sort that'd be interested in spirituality. That was my judgment. How foolish of me. But that's what I thought, right? Interesting experience. Anyway, I go through it all. I get to the end and I shut down my equipment and we start talking. And it's like, they tell me, man, we was just at a funeral. And it wasn't just, it was really sad. This young lad had killed himself and it was a very sad day. But they came in right at the moment where I started talking about death, and they blew me away. They were saying about how it was so nice and beautiful to actually hear what I was talking about. It really took the edge off what was otherwise a very sad and depressing day. And they themselves, all of us couldn't believe what just happened. Like how the divine timing of that was absolutely beautiful, impeccable, amazing. And that's just a little example of how the divine can work and how synchronicities can work. And we had a good chat. I ended up giving him my details and about my podcast and so on. Just amazing how things can play out sometimes. All right. So now we're getting on to losing the fear of death. This is the biggest fear that we have as a population, as a human. And in a way, the survival instinct is very, very powerful and it's actually very useful for the continuation of the species. However, losing the fear of death is very, very important because once you don't fear death, that will change how you act, it will change how you feel, it will change how you look at the world. And that's what we're all about with the spiritual path. The spiritual path is so much about your perspective and how you look at this place. There's a million and one different ways to look at this world, probably more than that. So you've got to, over time, develop, grow, and evolve the best perspective that you can. And that's why spiritual eclecticism, the cherry-picked way, spirituality without the bullshit, leads us to the most empowering perspectives that are even possible to acquire. And when you can consciously at least lose the fear of death, you're really onto a winner. You'll be more willing to take risks, and you will go for opportunities that if you were in a state of fear, you'd never actually go for. But if you can continually chip away at the fear, thought by thought, belief by belief, you will eventually become a force to be reckoned with, somebody who owns this shit and isn't scared of anything. Now, let's be realistic. If someone puts a gun to my head, I'm definitely going to feel fear and want to have my life continue. So it's not like the movies where there is no reaction to danger, but that's a very in the moment thing. The moment the person shoots me or removes the gun and I'm out of the situation, I won't be scared of death or gun anymore. But if you continually, every day, the fear of death is chipping away at your energy and influencing how you think, act, and feel, then that's a bad thing. And you want to remove the fear of death as soon as possible. How did I do it? Well, it was getting to the understanding of this is just a temporary existence. It's not the end. My soul was here before I was alive. It'll be here after I'm dead. And death is just a transition. And there are actually more ways to die than is often portrayed. I do believe it's possible to have a soft transition into the next world. I guess some people call that ascension, but I don't believe death has to be a terrible, painful ordeal, although that's basically how everybody goes, unless they're lucky and they go in their sleep. This ties into the levels of reality. Now, if you haven't already, I have mentioned it before, the Law of One books are incredible. They've developed the best perspective that I've seen so far on the levels of reality beyond this one. Now, this ties into as well our consciousness, and as it goes through its evolutionary journey, it progresses through the different densities. And when you get to the next density up, you're able to obviously view, see, and manipulate all the densities below you. But for example, animals have little to no free will. They're completely under our whim. We can do whatever we like to animals, and there might be consequences for if you're, abusing an animal. But in terms of the fact that we can farm them and they don't really have much of a say in what we do to them because they are on a lower density of reality. Same thing with plants. We just do whatever we want to a plant. It can't really fight back. But then if you look at how a cow can eat a grass and the grass can't really do much about that, it's just a chain of evolution. And ultimately at the bottom, there's like rocks and minerals and crystals, and perhaps our consciousness somehow starts around there. And there's some sort of process where it develops over time and eventually it passes on to the second density, which is the plant and animal kingdom. And we progress from there till we get to perhaps a pet dog or a cat or a dolphin, whatever the most advanced animal is. And once we've had enough of that, learned all the lessons in that level, we progress and have our first lives as humans. And I've covered how that might start out. And then we can keep going and transition into the fourth density, and it goes up as per the Law of One. Maybe this is how it works. It's the best interpretation I found anyway. We go from the fourth density to the fifth density to the sixth density, and then we reunite back with God at the seventh density. And it even suggests it goes on beyond that, but it's beyond our comprehension to even get into what that is like. But even from the fourth to the sixth is massive, massive leaps in everything. So there's a lot there to contemplate, a lot to unpack. I highly recommend reading those books if anything I just said there is of interest. And whilst we're on the subject of death and life, I do believe it's possible for us to have way, way longer lifespans, hundreds of years longer than they are right now. And when I did actually read the Bible, the first thing that struck me was in the first few pages, it's talking about people that have lifespans of 900 years, 800 years, like that's just normal. Then for whatever reason, I mean, we've progressed. We've gone from 30 years, if you're lucky, to 80, 90, 100 if you play your cards right. But I still think, although we've tripled the life expectancy roughly, that's still way, way shorter than what it could be. Now, I can't say I have all of the tricks and tips on how you're supposed to do that, but I just intuitively believe and know deep inside of myself that we can have far longer lifespans. And in the Qigong literature or some of the literature you see in East Asia or Asia in general, there's all these rumors about people living hundreds of years longer than they're supposed to and still maintaining the vitality in the body and the mind, because it's no point getting to 200, but you're just a raisin who can't think or talk or walk. But if you can continually age to 200, 300 or more, I believe it's totally possible, and maintain the vitality and your state of mind, then why would you not want to do that? Now, it's one thing to not want to die out of fear of death because you think that's the end and you haven't developed the sufficient spiritual belief system and foundation to know that that's not the case. But it's another thing to say that imagine the wisdom that somebody who lived to 200 would have. Can you imagine how wise and intelligent that being would be? 200 years old. And all of the experiences that they would have had, the lessons they would have learned, the perspectives that they would have. Absolutely incredible. Our lives are far too short, I believe. I think they could be way, way longer. And Bruce Lipton is famously quoted for saying, the only reason we age is because we collectively believe in aging. That's a fascinating line. I invite you to meditate and contemplate on that. Then it's just breaking out of the collective belief system. And how do we do that? Well, over time, I suppose, with a lot of practice and dedication, but that ties into as well the idea of collective thought forms and how that can keep reality in place to some degree. And then you also can get into Rupert Sheldrake's work of morphogenetic fields and how when one person is able to do something, it can make it easier for the next person, especially if it's the first time something's ever been done. Now, this is actually the final chapter in my book, and it's all the way at the end for good reason, because I feel this is the cherry on the cherry cake, is psychic abilities. And now I reckon at some point in our history, we were far more psychically developed than, for whatever reason, we have lost these abilities. And now it's a part of our destiny to evolve them once again. And our enemies know about this. They know about how powerful our psychic abilities are. And they know if the population was more psychic, then their game is up. So they've put massive, massive efforts into not only shutting down people spiritually and psychically, but also creating a collective consciousness that looks at a lot of these things like woo-woo and won't even go there, won't even start the process of contemplating how these things could be possible. But when we tie into the fact that we only see a tiny percentage of the world around us, we tie into the fact that we have so much unlocked potential. We have so much potential yet to unlock. A lot of the Qigong literature talks about this. I do believe it's totally possible for us to have psychic abilities beyond what we would call, well, beyond what's possible right now. I've experienced them briefly with various experiences throughout my life, and I do believe it's the next step in our destiny. And so, as I mentioned, our enemies, they utilize the occult because they know about its power. They are masters of the occult. Credit where credit's due. We are up against some intelligent beings here at the very top of the elite pyramid, or should I say the elite evil pyramid, because they're not the only elites. There is also elite good. Thank God for that. But they know how to use this. Then they'll use all the different tricks in the book to get you to comply with their evil agenda. But they know about the laws, the higher laws of free will and permission. And that's why you will see that ultimately everybody who falls under the spell of evil is choosing to do so. And I cover this in my book. But I've also put this stuff at the end because it's important to have the moral development, the framework, the connection to God and everything else, and have a good understanding of your ego, done plenty of shadow work before you get to this stuff, because it's way more important to have all of that stuff mastered before you start getting into the occult psychic stuff. But that's where the most evolved people are going to be drawn to. And we do need some people focusing on that side of life. Now, this is great. There's a nice story of this one. So I'm in Ireland and staying at this really nice property. And there's also another man who's working there who's Irish. And I have to admit, I think the Irish might be the only nation on the planet that actually has better humor than the British. It's a pretty close contest, but they're just so funny. We had a great time. I mean, I guess you could call him a normie. He wasn't awake at all, definitely not spiritually at least. And I didn't speak to him a huge amount, but we had some great conversations over lunch when everybody who was on the property got together. And there was just one story that stuck by me. This guy, like I say, not spiritually awake at all, but he had a dog and he had a partner who had a job, and they would always be coming home at different times. Their job meant that they didn't have a set time that they finished work. But he would always know when his partner's coming home, because the moment the dog started getting excited and going to the door, scratching the door, making all this noise, he would know that his partner's coming home. And sure enough, shortly after, she would arrive. So there's so much to this. And you could say that perhaps the dog is psychically picking up on his partner, sending the intention of going home. They're thinking of home. They've put home in their mind, and that the dog is able to pick up on that energy somehow. And I mention this because I do think animals like dogs and cats are psychic because they haven't had this part of them shut down like we have for whatever reason. And we can debate about why and how we've had our psychic capability shut down. But yeah, lots of people report similar things with their dogs and cats and seem to think that they have, say, psychic abilities. Now, there's an entire book by Rupert Sheldrake called Dogs That Know When Their Owners Are Coming Home. I didn't know about this book when I heard this story, but I really enjoyed it because obviously this guy was completely flabbergasted. He had no idea, no explanation on how this could be happening, but he seemed absolutely fascinated by it. And so, yeah, definitely check out that book if that sounds interesting to you. It's just a little glimpse of the psychic potential within animals and also within us. Now, here is a psychic ability. It's never really framed as a psychic ability, but it's definitely the most spoken about extrasensory ability in the New Age scene. And it's never framed as an extrasensory ability, as a psychic ability. But I like to frame it like that because that's what it is when you think about it. It's an ability that we have that goes beyond the five senses. It influences reality in ways that we can't see, but we know that it happens. Now, there are different ways to do reality creation, and for sure, that's why, again, I hammer the New Age a lot, because this psychic ability has basically been marketed to the ego, I guess, probably for purposes of making a lot of money, because it's, laziness and so on, and appealing to not wanting to put the effort in and just do some very superficial visualization for like 10 minutes a day, and then that's going to sort everything out. But as we get into now, there are actually a few different ways reality creation plays out. The one that everybody knows about, the one that's spoken about in The Secret, for example, is just active reality creation. And that is getting into a state of mind, a state of being where you are already experiencing whatever it is that you want to attract. If you wanted to have more abundance in your life, you start thinking, feeling, and visualizing what that would be like. And you could do that for anything in your life that you want to have more of. The only issue is not having the spiritual foundation and the knowledge of self to be able to use this psychic ability from a place so that you will manifest and create reality that doesn't circumvent your spiritual journey. If you're just manifesting and creating from ego and you put enough energy into it, you might get what you want, but that might take you off your spiritual path and cause you far greater harm in the long run. So you've got to use this ability wisely. Now, passive reality creation isn't spoken about that much, but people are starting to get their heads around this. And basically, that is that you are creating reality in real time every second of every day. The fascinating concept. And I do believe that's how it works. But then how do we alter what we're creating? Well, this is where everything that we've spoken about so far comes into play. Is that if you change yourself on a deep level subconsciously, you change your aura, you change the way your energy flows throughout your body, from body mind practices, or from instilling a better belief system, or from clearing old trauma, connecting to God in a really deep way, all of these things and more, you will change fundamentally who you are on the baseline level. That means that in the background, your mind, with its incredible reality creation abilities, will be pushing in, pulling out experiences that reflect your internal state. It's kind of like a superior way of reality creation. I mean, this is basically what you want to aim for, and in a way it makes it a bit easier, and it's a little bit less riskier because you can never go wrong with doing your spiritual progression. And then you just get to a point where it's like reality creation is on autopilot. You just naturally have a high vibe. You're naturally bringing in all of these amazing experiences, and your timeline is just naturally amazing. But there is a time and place, I believe, for active reality creation, especially when we get into what we're going to talk about shortly, spiritual activism, where you consciously use these metaphysical principles to alter the timeline in very interesting ways. Now, talking about altering the timeline in very interesting ways, you've got active collective reality creation. Now, this has been best highlighted with the Maharishi effect. And now this is a phenomenon that was studied and researched, and it's been going on for a few decades now. It definitely peaked in around the 1980s, 1990s, where if enough people got together and practiced this certain kind of meditation, it was noticeable and measurable that the crime rates in the local area of the city or wherever it was being practiced would decrease. So these people generated that powerful of a vibe together. They influenced reality around them, and that had an effect on people in ways that can be hard to comprehend, but basically it affects probability, it affects the ways people think at an unconscious level. If people are just, without even knowing, being hit with all of this very powerful love vibes, or whatever vibe they had that was positive, then it affects how they think and they don't even realize it. Obviously, the opposite can be also true, and we saw that throughout COVID. I do believe that was one of the biggest examples of what that can do in a negative sense when all the fear is being weaponized against us. So something to be aware of. But as well, passive collective reality creation is more of what we were talking about. And that's basically how I do believe that we can pull in and push away experiences on the collective level. Now, when I think about COVID and what happened and how it seemed like it was incredibly polarizing, it's not just that people that were asleep got hammered, but the people who were awake, especially the most evolved and on it people, they really rode the wave of all of this energy that was around. And some people have then continued that on and continued on with making their own movements and businesses that are sustaining them, but also helping people in incredible ways. And the entire Awake Festival circuit is a result of that. People that were active in that time have continued the momentum on with their movements. And so what I'm getting at is that I think that we as a species may have attracted that experience of COVID to for the polarization effect, for those that were evil become more evil, those that were good became more good, and we actually want more of that, basically. So we sort of pulled that in, but then also how that played out in each nation was different. Not each nation went through the same experience, but everyone was affected by COVID on some level. Some nations never shut down, and some had lockdowns that weren't so bad, and others were full-blown tyranny. And maybe the ones that were full-blown tyranny needed that for that segment of the population to have the opportunity to wake up if they haven't already. Or it could be that it was individually tailored depending on the consciousness of the population and so on. But that's also a very interesting part of reality. And that's why I say over and over again how spirituality is how we win ultimately, because when enough of us together have evolved to a high enough level, we will collectively push and pull experiences that are going to create a society that is beyond the wildest dreams of anybody in such a positive sense. But we need an evolved population to get there. And we do it mind by mind, thought by thought, person by person. We evolve into the better world. And here, I'm going to give you a story of how I utilized spiritual activism back in the early days of COVID. So in the UK, the first mandates that were to come out after lockdown was mask mandates. And they wanted everybody who went into a supermarket to have to wear a mask. And I can remember when it first came out, and I had this, well, I say first come out, when it was announced that it was going to happen, they gave a date in the future. From this point, you apparently are going to have to wear a mask to do your shopping. Now, I can remember when that happened, and I went to the mirror. I had this neck warmer scarf thing, and it's something that I could cover my mouth with. And as I was doing that, looking myself in the mirror, I got so fucking angry. I just felt this rage boiling inside of me, and I just ripped it off, and I never wore a mask ever. But they had this mandate, and when it was announced that it was going to happen, I was like, no way. And I did everything in my reality that I could to fight back against this. Way back then in like 2020 or whenever it was, I didn't have the influence and following that I do now. I was talking to everybody in my reality, like, yeah, we've got to stop this. We can't accept this. This is just not a good thing to happen. On top of that, I was also doing some reality creation, and I was visualizing, thinking, and feeling what it would be like to go into the supermarket to do my shopping after the mandates had been announced, mask free, and what that would be like. And I also remember I was visualizing what it'd be like to read an article saying how the mask mandates had failed, how they were going to be repealed for whatever reason, and so on. And then skip forward to the day of the mandates being announced. I continued on with this reality creation. I continued on with the videos, and I continued on telling everybody my reality about the bad stuff that could come from this. And on the day, I walk in, I've still got the video, it's still online of me doing my maskless shop. Very happy. So all of that happened, and then it wasn't too long after that that mask exemptions became a thing. And there was this entire section of legal jargon that was created specifically for mask exemptions. As far as I'm aware, the UK was the only country to have something like this. And it was like, I think I helped create that. And it wasn't just me. I can't take full credit because for sure I wasn't the only person in the country who didn't want to be wearing a mask at all. So it was like there was this collective energy there, and I took advantage of some of that. And I do believe I helped influence the timeline. And it came to fruition. I never wore a mask. I never had a test. I obviously never took one of those damn jabs. And I think the spiritual activism I did helped with that. And you can think about how you could use that to stop other parts of the enemy's agenda. This is a very, very interesting, powerful tool that we have in our spiritual toolbox, spiritual activism. And if you could get people that could come together, groups of people, and you can pool your energies, well, we can only imagine what we could create. Now, here's something I just thought was worth mentioning. This is a very interesting phenomenon of this world, and I call it the white orb experiment. So far, everyone that I've shown this experiment to in real life has been able to replicate this experiment. Now, I can't tell you exactly what these white orbs are. I think they might be chi or prana or energy, whatever they are. They don't respond to wind or breath, because when I've seen them, I've tried blowing to try and move them. They didn't respond. But they sort of dash around, dot around. And so if you want to replicate this experiment, what you want to do is you want to find a nice, sunny, blue sky day. And obviously in the UK, that's a bit of a big ask to begin with. But I have seen these indoors on a cloudy day, so it's not necessary. It's just easiest with these conditions. And you just want to relax your eyes. Obviously, don't be looking at the sun. Just look at the sky. Relax your eyes. Get into a bit of a meditative state. Take some nice deep breaths. Take your time. And when you get to this state of mind, state of being, you'll start to see all of these little white orbs flying and dashing around. And it's just worth mentioning because it seems to be that everyone can see this. And when I was in New Zealand, there was this moment when I thought, I'm going to show the guys I'm hanging out with at the time this white orb experiment, see if they can see it for themselves. And there's a group of 4 of us, and 2 of the people there were already spiritually awake. But there was this American woman who wasn't awake at all. She was a lovely woman, though. And we all sat down, and I told them about this. And it wasn't too long before the 2 awake guys were able to see the little white orbs. But the American woman, fair play to her, she stuck with it. It probably took her between 3 to 5 minutes to finally have a relaxed enough mind that she could actually see these little white orbs. And she was blown away. But she was like, wow, yeah, I see it. And I thought that's really cool because obviously you're not into this spiritual stuff at all, but even you were able to see these white orbs. And if anybody knows what they are, please do let me know. But if you haven't seen them yet, I highly advise checking it out because I think it's just a little taste, a little glimpse into what we can see beyond our usual perception. And I do believe if we are more psychically activated, this place would be kind of like a psychedelic experience, but all the time. Now, we're going to touch on something that I think is quite important and quite crucial if you want to get psychic abilities, and that is third eye self-care. So, I do believe to begin the journey of unlocking psychic abilities, the third eye is where you start, and there are some things that you really, really want to take into consideration if you want to go down this path. And again, that's why it's at the end, because once you go so far, you can't go back. Right. The most important thing, and probably not just for third eye self-care, but for your health and your mental health in general, is clean water. And of course, we would all love a beautiful cascading spring right on our property where we can just go out and fill up our glass of water on that beautiful, clear spring. However, let's be real, most of us don't have that. So just get the best quality water that you can. In the UK, the best bottled water I have found is Volvic. However, right now, where I am in South Wales, I'm blessed that, well, still, it takes me about an hour to do a round trip to collect my water. But I take all of these bottles and I go to an elevated stream. It's important that it's elevated because if it's on ground level, everything will flow into it. And that can be cow shit or horse shit or even chemicals from the human societies around. So you want to make sure it's elevated. And I get all of my water there. I drink with it. I cook with it. If I could, I'd bathe with it. But I still take showers, obviously. So I do believe clean water is so important. I found that it has the greatest impact on my health of my third eye, especially if I drink artificially fluoridated water. I found that to be the quickest way to shut down my third eye. Even one glass can have a serious negative impact. So no wonder they're trying to add it to the water supply, huh? So yeah, whether it's bottled water, you go and collect your own water from nature, or you get an in-home distiller, you get water filters for your home, or yeah, whether that's water distillation or reverse osmosis, whatever you've got to do to get the highest quality water. And the second most important thing for third eye self-care is low radiation devices. Now, I found that some people just don't seem to be impacted by the radiation coming off their device. But for others, it's a problem, but they don't know it's actually the device that's causing the issue. For example, some people have serious trouble getting to sleep. Now, it could be many reasons for that, but one of them that a lot of people don't consider is that it could be their phone or their laptop that they're using. Now, let me take you through a bit of a story on why I use the devices that I use. This right here, this is a very old phone. This is an iPhone 5 SE. Very old model, but the reason I have this model and not a more advanced later edition of the iPhone is because when I did actually upgrade once to an iPhone 8, I noticed a significant increase in the radiation. Significant to the fact that I'd only have to use it for 10, 15 minutes and I've got a headache that will stay with me for ages till I do some grounding or whatever and try and get rid of it. Very annoying and frustrating, I have to admit. But did you know that the iPhone 12 was banned for sale in France because of the radiation? And that's kind of weird. Only France has picked this up and it's only the iPhone 12. What about all of the other models? Because I found a massive problem with iPhone 8. So let's assume between an 8 and 12, at least there was trouble with radiation and most likely beyond that as well. But it's interesting. I think if somebody is completely psychically shut down, they won't even notice. Some people don't even have trouble sleeping because I've seen it before when I was in Spain and did some time traveling in Spain. I was staying with this really nice Spanish family, and once we went on a trip in their motorhome to lovely springs. It was a great trip. But you see this guy, he's got his phone, quite a big phone, and we're going to bed, lights are all off, but he's like, woo, 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 woo. And then he could just go to sleep like that. Like it just didn't bother him at all. Some people are like that, but he wasn't psychically activated in any kind of way, but it also didn't seem to affect him in a negative sense. So ignorance can be bliss, but also there's a lot that you'll miss out on if you're not psychically activated. So yeah, a low radiation device I think is very, very important. And again, the laptop that I currently use, prior to this one, I had a MacBook 2012 and it was a refurbished version, but I brought it in 2019. I had it for 5 years. It was still running like a tank. It was maxed out specs. But what finally done it was I tipped half a bottle of water all over it, unfortunately. And that was the end of that laptop. But I went to upgrade and I got a 2018 MacBook that had been refurbished. It was basically double the specs of my previous laptop in terms of processing power and RAM and everything. It was an absolute beast. However, the same thing I noticed from when I went to the iPhone 8, same thing with this later version of the MacBook. And I was quite upset and frustrated. But I almost had been expecting that to happen, but it's quite annoying because it was a very powerful device. But it was so bad for me that I ended up selling that and getting another version of the MacBook 2012. I got the 15-inch version And this is absolutely fine. I could look at this for hours and hours and hours, and I do know it says a mild, like a very mild radiation, but nothing to write home about. I can deal with it, still sleep fine, especially if I just give it a bit of a rest, half an hour or so before going to sleep. This is really significant. And because of the thousands of hours of meditation, qigong, and yoga that I've done over the years, I have built a bit of a sensitivity to this stuff, and I feel it's part of my role here to let people know so that other people can be aware of this stuff. And hopefully in the future, we have a society where this is more understood and we have devices that are deliberately radiation free or at least very, very low. But we're just getting to understand how this is an issue for people, much like how back in the days, it took a very long time for people to realize that lead pipes for water is not a good idea. We sort of have these revelations over time collectively, and I think the radiation coming from devices is going to be another one of those eventually, hopefully. But for now, if you think this is an issue for you, I definitely recommend getting low radiation devices. It was such a important thing for me that I went down in terms of spec for my laptop and my phone because I'd much rather have a slightly slower computer, but a radiation almost free computer. It makes a massive difference to everything. If you start having low quality sleep, you don't get enough sleep, then that affects everything, right? It's a big deal. And who wants to have a headache all day? There's loads of people that I've met that just don't know why they're getting a headache, and there can be a few reasons, but I guarantee if you're drinking the best water that you can get your hands on, you have a low radiation device, that's going to solve a lot of the headache problems. But also, if you're going to start activating your third eye, there are certain things you need to be aware of because once you go so far, you won't be able to do the same things that you were able to do before you were aware of this stuff. But you will also unlock some cool shit that wasn't available beforehand. But there are pros and cons, so just be aware of that. And it's also worth mentioning that certain cleaning products, especially the sprays. I think it might be just because when you breathe it in through your nose, it goes directly to your fucking brain. But some of these are seriously toxic, and obviously we have to have our homes clean, but there are certain products that are worse than others, and you can make a lot of home remedies that are going to be far more better for you than these cleaning products. I've just noticed that's what I have a very bad reaction to sometimes, certain products. And basically, most spray deodorants are literally just fucking poison. It's like just fumigating the air with poison every time they're sprayed. I mean, the last place I was staying at, I had this beautiful gym and in this lovely facility, and it had the sauna and steam room, and you'd have a nice hot workout. You'd go into the sauna or the steam room or both, and you'd come out feeling fresh, feeling clean, and then you'd be in a tight, small locker room, and some motherfucker starts spraying his deodorant right at that point. It was so frustrating because obviously you're quite open, your pores are open, everything, and it really was very frustrating to have someone poison the atmosphere after I've just gone for a bit of a cleanse. But there we are. Hopefully, again, over time and in the future, we will understand that most spray deodorants are just poison. So you can avoid most of that. There are obviously some deodorants that aren't toxic, but you can look into all of that for yourself. Body scan meditation is probably the safest and most calmest way, let me put it like that, way to gradually over time open your third eye and get into the psychic phenomenon. Because Qigong is definitely, at least of the lineage that I practiced, Zen Qigong. If you practice Zen Qigong, it will open up your psychic abilities faster than anything I've ever came across. But that can be a bit of a bad thing because then you'll very quickly, you'll be more sensitive to everything that I've just mentioned and a few other things. So to balance that out, I think body scan helps you get more grounded and can lead to a more gradual and soft transition into the world of psychic phenomena. Because if you go in too fast, too quickly, I think there can be issues. But this is definitely worth mentioning. And if you are considering evolving to this level, be aware that our enemies know about this and they've done a lot to try and stop our spiritual and psychic development. So you're going to have to dodge some parts of reality. Be aware of that. All right, so now let's get into a fascinating book. Now, I could have put loads of books in this presentation, but I thought I'll show this one because I can pretty much guarantee nobody, especially in Buxton when I had this talk, nobody will know about this book, and pretty much everybody listening to this recording won't know about this book. But this is written by Dr. Pang Ming. It's called Paranormal Abilities the techniques of Zen Qigong science. There's so much in this book where it's talking about psychic abilities. It's an entire book dedicated to the subject. But one of the most fascinating things that comes from this book is a reporting on the Qigong experiments that were done in China. So they were able to move objects with their mind, with energy. They were able to influence the rate at which fish grew and developed. And you're talking, like fish that they would grow to eat. Although, to be honest, I don't really recommend farmed fish. But anyway, they were able to replicate these experiments. And again, this extended to crops. We're able to increase the rate at which crops grew, their nutrient density, and so on. Very fascinating, just with chi fields. They were able to improve the strength of steel. They were able to improve the learning rate of children, and so much more, all with the usage of energy. And Qigong is fascinating. And these experiments they did in China just blew me away. So you definitely want to check out this book if it sounds interesting to you. Absolutely fascinating stuff. Now, here we go. Just to wrap everything up here, I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. I bet you're not the same person who went into this presentation as you are now, especially if you've taken the time to contemplate and digest all of the great things we've covered so far. But that's a wrap, really. If you haven't already, go to my website, traviscook.uk, continue the journey. You can find all of the other episodes of the podcast. You can find the books that I have, and soon there's going to be a new one, Spirituality Without the Bullshit. And if you signed up to the mailing list, you will be the first to know when it drops. Also, I offer coaching, so you can click on there, find out more details about that, and book a session with me. And we can see where we can take your spiritual journey. And you can find some of my writings and just everything that I'm about really on this website, traviscook.uk. And if you haven't already, follow me on Telegram and Instagram at traviscookuk. It'd be great to have you in the Telegram chat. Always looking for more evolved beings to come and join the Telegram chat and shoot the shit in there about all things spirituality and what's going on in the world and in our minds. We're in a spiritual war. It's being fought every day, minute by minute, thought by thought. There are many ways to fight back. Protesting in London is just one of the more obvious, easy to see ways of fighting back. In reality, we can do our part by living our path with our heart, choosing to live by love and not fear, and finding an occupation that we enjoy, makes money, and helps others. I am a living example of this, and hopefully my words and my life will be an inspiration to others to join me in creating the better world. And finally, I saw this on the train on the way up to the presentation in Buxton, and I thought, what a brilliant meme. It does really sum it all up. And if you're just listening to the audio, it's got a picture. It looks like a child, actually. And they've got a boot on their head, and it says, before spiritual awakening. And it looks like someone is standing on their head. But then on the right, you see that it says, after a spiritual awakening. And you can see that it's actually the child that has their hand in the boot, and they're putting that pressure of tyranny on themselves. Very interesting. I invite you to contemplate and think about that. And thank you so much for joining me on this journey. I appreciate you. I love you. It'll be people like you and me who change this world. And thank you so much. Big, big love.